Welcome to Cosmic Wand. Today's adventure, Harry's Gringotts test at age 8 revealed he secretly owned half of magical Britain. If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1, the test. The list was taped to the inside of the cupboard door, and Harry Potter had read it so many times that he no longer needed light to do it. Weed the borders, scrub the front step. Wash the breakfast things and the lunch things, and don't you dare break one. Sweep the garage. Be finished before Dudley's program. Be invisible before Vernon's car turned into the drive. Be nothing at all before Petunia decided she had a reason to be annoyed. He had learned the arithmetic of number 4, Privet Drive, the way other boys learn their times tables, and the sum at the bottom of every column was the same. There was enough for 3. There had never been a plan for 4. He was 8 years old, and he had taught himself not to want things, because wanting was the one chore on the list that never got him anything but trouble. This morning the wanting tried him anyway. It came up through the floor with the smell of frying bacon, and his stomach answered it before his head could tell it to be quiet. 2 rashers for Dudley, 2 for Vernon, 1 sometimes for Petunia, who watched her figure the way Vernon watched the football. For Harry there would be the rind if Dudley left any, scraped onto a plate and handed through the gap in the cupboard door like something posted to a place no one wanted to visit. He didn't cry about it. He had cried about it once, years ago, and Petunia had told him through the slats that the crying was exactly the kind of ungrateful behavior that proved why nobody had wanted him in the first place, and he had decided, with the flat finality of a child who has run out of other options, that he would simply never give her the sound again. It was the only thing he owned that they couldn't take. He kept it carefully. Boy. Vernon's voice came down the stairs ahead of Vernon, the way thunder came ahead of rain. "Are you up?" "Yes, Uncle Vernon." "Then why do I smell my breakfast burning?" He didn't. The bacon was perfect. Petunia never burned bacon. But the question wasn't a question. It was a rope thrown into the cupboard to see whether Harry would grab it and be hauled out into the open where the morning's bad mood could find a use for him. Harry let it lie. He pushed the door, ducked out into the hall on hands and knees because the cupboard was built for coats and not for boys, and stood and was small and waited. Petunia turned from the cooker with a fork in her hand. Her eyes went over him the way they went over a stain she'd already decided was permanent. "There's washing up," she said, "and the windows want doing before it rains, and keep away from the front. Mrs. Number 7 asked after you again last week, and I won't have it." What she meant was that Mrs. Number 7 had asked kindly whether the thin, dark-haired boy was quite well, and Petunia could not afford the question. The Dursleys lived in a house held up entirely by what the neighbors believed, and Harry was the crack in the plaster they spent every day painting over. "Yes, Aunt Petunia," he said, and went to the sink and turned the tap and made himself into the sound of running water. That was how the morning would have gone. The dishes, the windows, the long hot middle of the day spent in the garden being careful not to exist. He could have told you the shape of it the way you can tell the shape of a road you've walked 1,000 times in the dark. He could not have told you about the knock. It came at 9:30, and it was wrong from the first stroke. Knocks at Privet Drive were soft, apologetic, the knocks of catalogue men and charity tins. This one landed 3 times, evenly spaced, with the weight of something that had every right to be there. Petunia's fork stopped. Vernon lowered his paper a careful inch. "Don't answer it," Petunia said too quickly. But Vernon was already up, because Vernon could not bear to be told what to do in his own hall, and he flung the door open with the bullying cheer he used on anyone he intended to send away. The cheer died. On the step stood a young man Harry had never seen, and the first thing Harry's mind did, because his mind always did this, was take an inventory. Tall, perhaps 18, perhaps a year older. Red hair pulled back into a tail, a fang threaded onto a leather cord at his ear, boots that had been to places without pavements. Over ordinary clothes he wore a long coat of oxblood leather, and stitched into the breast of it, in thread that caught the light when no light was on it, was a mark Harry's eyes wanted to slide off, a stylized G, crowned with a key crossed behind it. "Mr. Dursley," the young man said, and his voice was pleasant and entirely unbothered. "My name is William Weasley. I'm here on behalf of Gringotts Bank." He held up a single sheet of heavy paper, folded once, sealed with a blot of red wax stamped with the same crown G. "I have a writ for the minor child Harry James Potter. I'd appreciate 10 minutes of your time. I'm prepared to take considerably less." For one beat the hall was silent enough to hear the tap still running in the kitchen. Then Vernon laughed, and it was an ugly sound, relief and fury braided together. "Get off my step," he said. "We don't want any. We don't want your kind, and we certainly don't want anything to do with banks." He spat the word like it had been one of the others he wasn't saying. "There's no Potter here," which was a lie so large that Harry, drying a plate in the kitchen with his heart climbing his throat, almost admired it. The young man, Weasley, did not move. He looked past Vernon's shoulder down the hall, and his eyes found Harry through the kitchen doorway, and something flickered across his face that Harry didn't have a name for because it had been a long time since anyone had aimed it at him. It was not pity. Pity made people look away. This made him look harder. "Hello," Bill Weasley said to Harry over Vernon's bulk as if Vernon were a piece of furniture between them. "You'd be Harry. Now see here," Vernon began, swelling. "Mr. Dursley." Bill's voice didn't rise, it did something else. It cooled, and the cooling was worse than shouting. "I'm going to explain this once, and I'd ask you to listen as though it matters, because it does. The writ in my hand was issued under goblin law, which predates yours by a margin you would find it difficult to imagine, and it concerns a vault that has been held in trust at Gringotts since before that boy was born. There is a deadline on a matter touching his inheritance. That deadline expires today. If the bank does not perform a certain test on his blood before sundown, a great deal of property reverts to parties who would be very glad to see it reverted, and the bank loses both a client and its honor. The bank dislikes losing either. He let that sit. I am not asking your permission to take Harry to London. As his bloodkin, you are entitled to be informed and to accompany him, and that is the whole of your entitlement. I am informing you. Would you like to accompany him?" "Inheritance," Petunia said. She had come into the hall without anyone noticing, the way she could, and her face had gone the color of the underside of a fish. The word had landed in her and disturbed something old. Harry watched it happen, watched his aunt look at the crown G on the man's coat and at the boy by the sink, and put two things together that she had spent 8 years keeping apart. "There's no money," she said, but the lie came out cracked, hopeful at the edges in a way that frightened Harry more than her cruelty ever had. "Lily, my sister, never had. They were paupers, the both of them. I'm not at liberty to discuss the estate with you, Mrs. Dursley," Bill said, almost gently. "You're not on it." He turned back to Harry, and the cool went out of him again. "Harry, I know none of this makes sense. I'm not going to pretend it does. But everything I've said is true, and you are not in any trouble, and you are allowed to say no to me. You understand that? You can say no." It was the strangest sentence anyone had said to Harry in his life. You can say no. He turned it over. In his experience, the people who told you that you could say no were the people who were certain you wouldn't dare. But this man had said it like he was handing over a tool, expecting it to be used. Harry put the plate down. He dried his hands on the dishcloth, folded it over the rail of the cooker, and squared the corners, because his hands wanted something orderly to do while the rest of him decided. "You said there's a vault," Harry said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "Held in trust since before I was born." "Yes, then it's mine." "Yes, and someone's about to take it." A corner of Bill's mouth moved. "That's the shape of it, yes." Harry looked at his aunt, who had one hand pressed flat to the wallpaper as though the house might tilt. He looked at his uncle, gone the color of a brick, the writ's wax seal reflected red in his furious little eyes. He looked at the cupboard under the stairs with its taped-up list and its smell of dust and old coats, the whole sum of everything Privet Drive had ever decided he was worth. "I'd like to go to London," Harry said. Vernon found his voice. "You'll do no such, then come with me," Harry said to him evenly, "and watch." It was the first order he had ever given anyone in that house. He felt it leave him like a stone leaving a sling, and he watched it strike, and he understood, standing in the kitchen in his cousin's outgrown jumper, that he had just learned something he would never be able to unlearn. Vernon didn't come. Vernon stayed in his hall, swelling and deflating, because a man who has spent 8 years being a giant to a child does not know what to do when the child stops being afraid in front of witnesses. Petunia came as far as the door. She didn't cross the step. She stood there with her arms folded over the dread in her stomach and watched the young man in the oxblood coat lay a hand on her nephew's shoulder, and the last thing Harry heard before the world folded was his aunt saying, very low to no one, I told them it would come for him." Then the hallway turned inside out. Harry had read about being squeezed through a tube. He had read about a great many things. Reading was the one luxury Privet Drive couldn't fully ration, because the school library was free and Dudley couldn't follow him there. Nothing he'd read had prepared him for the sensation of being pulled through a keyhole the size of a thought, with his own ribs as the door. It lasted a second and a small eternity, and then his feet hit cobbles and his stomach tried to leave through his mouth, and Bill Weasley's hand tightened to keep him upright. "First time's the worst," Bill said. "Breathe through it, don't be proud about it." Harry breathed through it. When the cobbles stopped trying to be the ceiling, he straightened and looked, and the looking took everything else out of his head. They stood at the head of a long, crooked street that should not have fitted inside London and plainly did not care. Crooked shop fronts leaned over a river of robed people. An apothecary's window steamed with violet smoke. Somewhere a stack of cauldrons rang as it toppled, and someone swore in a language that wasn't English. Owls slept in a tower of cages outside a shop that sold nothing but owls. A broomstick floated in a display case turning under its own spotlight, and a knot of children pressed their noses to the glass with a hunger Harry recognized, because it was the hunger he kept locked in the cupboard. But the single detail his mind seized and held out of all of it was the smell. The whole street smelled of wood smoke and brass and something underneath that he had no word for and would later learn to call magic, like the air just before lightning, like a struck match, like a held breath. He stood in it and felt, for one disloyal instant, as though he had walked out of a black and white photograph into the room where the color had been kept. "Diagon Alley," Bill said, watching his face. "You all right?" Yes, Harry said, which was not strictly true, but he had stopped offering the truth to adults a long time ago, and the habit held even now. He pulled his eyes off the street and pointed them where they needed to be. Where's the bank? Bill almost laughed. Straight ahead, you'll know it. He set off, and Harry kept pace, and the crowd parted around the red-haired cursebreaker without quite meaning to. He did know it. At the far end of the alley where the crooked shops ran out of nerve, a building of snow-white stone rose up over them all, crooked itself, leaning out and back and out again as though it had grown rather than been built. Bronze doors stood at the top of a flight of steps, and beyond them a second pair in silver, and over the silver doors a verse had been cut into the metal in letters as tall as Harry's hand. He read it on the way up, because he read everything. Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed, for those who take but do not earn must pay most dearly in their turn. Cheerful, Harry said. They mean it, said Bill. A creature in scarlet and gold stood at the silver doors, and Harry stopped because he had never seen anything like it, and he refused, on principle, to pretend that he had. It was perhaps a head shorter than him, with long, clever fingers and longer, clever feet, and a face that was all shrewd folds and dark, dark eyes that took an inventory of Harry exactly as Harry was taking an inventory of it. They regarded each other, the boy and the goblin, with the mutual respect of two creatures who have learned to read a room before they trust it. Cursebreaker Weasley, the goblin said, in a voice like a key turning. You found him. In Surrey, Bill said, under wards. We'll talk about the wards. We will talk about a great many things. The goblin's eyes had not left Harry. Heir Potter, I am Griffook. The bank has been expecting you for rather longer than you have been alive. He inclined his head, a precise fraction of a degree, and Harry, who had been taught nothing in his life about courtesy because no one had ever thought him worth teaching, returned exactly the same fraction by instinct because it was clearly a transaction and he understood transactions. Something moved behind Griffook's eyes that might have been approval. Come, the goblin said. We have until sundown and we have wasted 8 years. Inside, Gringotts was a cathedral that had decided to be a counting house. A vast marble hall ran away under a ceiling lost in shadow. 100 goblins sat at 100 high desks, weighing, stamping, scratching, counting out heaps of gold and silver and bronze under lamps that burned without smoke. The sound of it was the sound of 1,000 small certainties being recorded, and Harry, who had spent his whole life being told he didn't count, walked into the middle of a building that did nothing but and felt the floor of him shift. Griffook did not take them to one of the public desks. He took them down a side passage paneled in dark wood, past doors with no handles and one door that had teeth, to a chamber where a single long table waited under a chandelier of cold white light. The walls were shelved floor to ceiling with ledgers bound in leather gone almost black with age. At the far end of the table a chair stood empty. Beside it on a stand lay a sheet of parchment so old it had gone the color of weak tea, and a knife and a shallow dish of beaten silver. Another goblin waited by the table, older than Griffook, with iron gray at his temples and a coat of fine gray cloth pinned with a single white stone. He did not bow. He looked at Harry the way an auditor looks at a column he suspects of lying, and Harry decided at once that this was the one who mattered. Heir Potter, Griffook said, Ironclaw of the bank's inheritance and estates, he will conduct the testing. If we are permitted to conduct it at all, Ironclaw said. His voice was dry as a turning page. Sit, boy, we will not stand on ceremony. There is no time for it, and you have not been taught it, which is its own indictment of the people who had charge of you. Listen instead. He drew the parchment toward the center of the table with one long finger. Do you know what you are? A nuisance, Harry said before he could stop himself, and then, because the goblin had asked plainly and deserved better, he corrected it. I don't know, no one's ever told me anything true, that's why I came. Ironclaw's eyes flicked to Bill. He came of his own will. He did, Bill said, told his uncle to come and watch. The uncle didn't have the spine. Good. Ironclaw said it like a verdict. He turned back to Harry. Then I will tell you a true thing, and you will hold still while I tell you several more. Your parents were James and Lily Potter. They were not paupers. That is the first lie laid in your path, and it was laid deliberately, and before this day is out you will know by whom. Your father was the last lord of an old and wealthy house. When he and your mother died, their property passed into trust here in this bank under our hands. You have been, since you were 15 months old, a client of Gringotts. We have minded your gold faithfully because that is our law and our honor. We have not been permitted to mind you, and that is a wound to our honor that I intend to see closed. Harry sat very still. The wanting he had locked in the cupboard was rattling its door, and he held it shut by main force because he had learned a long time ago that the moment you let yourself believe a good thing was the moment it was taken away to teach you not to. You said there's a deadline, he said. Bill said it expires today. Tell me that part. Tell me why it has to be today. Ironclaw and Griffook exchanged a glance, and Harry understood that he had passed some kind of test before the test had begun, that they had expected a child to ask about the gold, and he had asked about the clock. There is a thing in our law called reversion, Ironclaw said. When a wizarding house dies out entirely, its property does not vanish. It falls dormant, held in trust, until a living house of the same blood comes to claim it. The window for that claim is a century and a day. Beyond it, the property escheats, it falls to the crown, which in this age means the ministry of magic, which in plain terms means it falls into the pockets of whichever men have positioned themselves to catch it. He tapped the ancient parchment. There is a house behind your house, boy, older than Potter, older than nearly anything that still draws breath in Britain. Its name is Peveril. The reversion window on the Chief Peveril line closes at sundown today, 1 century and 1 day after the last claim lapsed. If no blood heir of Peveril stands in this bank and proves his blood before the sun goes down, everything that house holds, and it holds a very great deal, passes out of our custody forever, into the hands of men who have been waiting 100 years for the clock to run out. And you think I'm the heir, Harry said. We do not think, Ironclaw said. We are about to know. He lifted the knife. This is the heritage parchment. It is older than the bank. It reads blood not as your ministry's clumsy charms read it, but truly line by line back into the dark, 7 drops. It will hurt for an instant and then it will not. It cannot lie, and it cannot be made to lie, which is why certain people in this city have spent a great deal of effort making sure you never came within 100 miles of it. He held the knife out, hilt first, across the table. I will not cut you, boy, you will cut yourself. The first thing a lord does is choose to bleed for his house. You choose it. Bill had gone very still by the door. Griffook had folded his clever hands. The cold light hung over the table, and the ledgers watched from the walls, and somewhere far above them the great hall counted and counted and counted. Harry looked at the knife. He thought about the list taped inside the cupboard door. He thought about the rind of bacon scraped onto a plate and posted through a gap. He thought about I told them it would come for him, and about a man who had said you can say no and meant it, and about a building made entirely of the act of keeping account that had kept account of him for 8 years while he was told he didn't count at all. He took the knife. It was heavier than it looked and warm as though it had been held. Where, he said. The pad of the thumb, said Ironclaw, over the dish. Harry set the edge to his thumb and pressed and turned once the way he'd seen Petunia bone a chicken, and the pane was bright and clean and gone almost before it arrived. He held his hand over the silver dish, and he counted under his breath, because counting was the thing he did when he needed the world to stay in order, and he let the drops fall. 1, 2, 3. The parchment, lying flat and dead on its stand, twitched. 4, 5. Ironclaw drew a breath through his teeth. 6, 7. Harry closed his fist. And the parchment came alive. It did not catch fire and it did not glow, nothing so theatrical. It simply began to write in ink that welled up out of the fibers of the page itself, a fine sloping hand racing across the parchment faster than any quill could move, and the first line it wrote in letters that thickened as they formed was, Harry James Potter, and under it, son of James Charles Potter, lord of the ancient and noble house of Potter and of Lily Potter née Evans. There, Ironclaw murmured. There you are at last, but the parchment was not finished. It had only cleared its throat. The quill-less hand swept down a line and kept going, and now it wrote faster, the letters crowding each other in their hurry. Heir, by descent unbroken through the line of Potter, to the most ancient house of Peveril. Griffook made a sound. Ironclaw did not move at all, which Harry would later understand was the goblin equivalent of a man falling out of his chair. And through Peveril, by right of seniority of blood and the lapse of all junior lines, claimant presumptive to the dormant houses of, and then the names began. They came down the page in a column, faster than Harry could read them. Names he had never heard, and names that something in him stirred to as though he had. Slytherin's rivals and Gryffindor's cousins. Houses that had ruled valleys and houses that had ruled trades. Houses that had died in the old wars and houses that had simply forgotten to have sons. The column reached the bottom of the page, and the parchment, with a sound like an indrawn breath, grew another foot of itself to keep writing. Then another. The names spilled past the edge of the stand and curled toward the floor, and still the ink came, line after line after line, and the cold white light caught the wet letters as they dried, and the room filled with the impossible whispering rush of a fortune introducing itself. Bill Weasley had pushed off the door and come to the table without realizing he had moved. That's, he said, Ironclaw, that's not how many is that? Be silent, Ironclaw said, not unkindly, in the voice of a man trying to count a flock in a lightning storm. His eyes were racing down the page. Be silent, Cursebreaker, and let it finish. It finished where Harry least expected it to. The flood of dormant houses thinned, slowed, and stopped, and the parchment paused as though gathering itself for one last thing. Then it wrote a single line, larger than all the rest, the letters drawn slow and deep as though the page wanted them remembered, and as the line formed Harry felt the hair rise along his arms, and the cold light in the chandelier guttered as if a wind had passed that no one else could feel. Heir of Gryffindor, of the 4 who built the school, by the blood of Peveril and the old accord. The ink dried, the parchment stilled. It lay across the long table and trailed onto the floor, yards of it, dense with names, and at the very top in its thickening hand was a boy in a cousin's jumper, and at the very bottom was the founding of the only world that had ever smelled to him like the room where the color was kept. Nobody spoke. Griffook had risen from his chair. Ironclaw stood with both hands flat on the table, leaning over the parchment, and for the first time the dry composure had gone out of him entirely. He looked, Harry thought, like a man reading the answer to a question his grandfathers had asked. Bill had gone the color of his own collar. The cold light steadied and burned on. "Get the director," Ironclaw said very quietly to Griffook without looking up. "Get Ragnock, get him now." Griffook went fast and the door with teeth shut behind him with a click. Harry looked at the river of names running off the table and pooling on the floor, and he looked at his thumb, which had already stopped bleeding, and he found that the thing he felt was not what he would have guessed. He had imagined in the cupboard on the nights when he let himself imagine anything, that being told he mattered would feel like sunrise. It didn't. It felt like standing at the top of the bank's white steps with the whole crooked street below, a long way up and a long way down and no railing. He became aware that both Ironclaw and Bill were watching him now, waiting, the way people wait to see whether a struck thing will fall. Waiting, he realized, for the tears. A child handed a fortune and a dead family and a lifetime of lies in a single afternoon was supposed to come apart, and they had braced for it, and they would have been kind about it, and Harry understood that being come apart over was just one more thing that would happen to him while other people decided what it meant. He didn't give them the sound. He had decided about that years ago, and the decision held. He pulled the trailing end of the parchment toward him instead with the same hand he had cut, and he ran his eyes back up the impossible column to the top, to his own name, to the word Lord, and to the word above all of it that the page had drawn so deep, Gryffindor, and then he lifted his head and looked Ironclaw full in the face. "All right," Harry said. His voice didn't shake, he made certain of it. "I believe you, it's mine, all of it." "It is," said Ironclaw. "Then I only have one question before the director comes." Harry laid his hand flat on the names, on the dormant houses, on 100 years of a clock running down, and he asked the goblin the question that the goblins had been waiting an entire afternoon, and the bank perhaps an entire century, to hear a Potter finally think to ask. "Who," said Harry, "has been spending it?" For a long moment Ironclaw simply looked at him. Then the goblin straightened and the dry composure came back into him like a blade going home into a sheath, and on his shrewd folded face appeared the first real expression Harry had seen there, something that was very close on a goblin to delight. 8 years old, Ironclaw said softly, to Bill, to the room, to the watching ledgers, and the first question out of him is the right one. He turned back to Harry and he bowed fully this time from the waist, the bow of one party to contract acknowledging the other across the table. "Sit down, Heir Potter," said the goblin who managed half of magical Britain without yet knowing he was talking to the boy who owned it. "Sit down. There is someone who will want to see this with his own eyes before we begin." Harry sat. He kept the trailing parchment under his hand, because some part of him expected it to be taken away the moment he looked elsewhere, and he had learned to keep a hand on the few things that were his. The door with teeth opened. The goblin who came through it was old in a way that made Ironclaw look like a clerk. He was no taller than the others, but the chamber seemed to arrange itself around him, the cold light bending toward the dull iron crown set close upon his brow. His coat was the black-green of standing water, and on his fingers were rings that Harry's eyes wanted to count and could not, because the number changed when he looked away. He moved without hurry, and the not hurrying was its own kind of power. Here was a creature who had never in his life needed to rush, because the world had always, in the end, waited. "Director Ragnock," Bill said and bowed, and for once the Cursebreaker's easy manner had gone entirely out of him. Ragnock did not look at Bill. Not look at Ironclaw. He crossed the chamber to the long table and stood over the river of names, and he read it not racing, the way Ironclaw had read it, but slowly, line by line, the way a man reads a letter he has waited his whole life to receive. The silence stretched, far above the great hall counted on. "A century," Ragnock said at last. His voice was deep and unhurried and old as foundations. "A century we have held this trust against the day the blood would come or the clock would beat it. Men of the ministry have come to this bank every year of that century, in fine robes, with fine smiles, to ask whether the Peveril line was truly extinct, whether the time might not be ripe for the estate to pass into the crown's careful keeping." His dark eyes lifted from the parchment and found Harry, and there was nothing soft in them, but there was something almost worse than softness. There was attention, the full and undivided attention of a power that did not waste it. "They will be very sorry," said the director of Gringotts, "that you came to us before sundown." Harry held the gaze. It was difficult. It was like looking into a well and feeling the well look back, but he had spent 8 years learning not to be the first to flinch, and the skill served him here as it had never served him at Privet Drive. "You knew I existed," Harry said, "all of you, for 8 years. We knew an heir of Potter lived. We are forbidden to seek a client who has not sought us. That is old law, and we keep our law even when it costs us." Ragnock's mouth moved. "We did not know what the parchment would show beneath the Potter name. No one living knew. The Peveril descent was a rumor in our oldest ledgers and a terror in certain others. Now it is ink." He laid one ringed finger very lightly on the great deep word at the bottom of the page. "Gryffindor. And this," he said, "this changes the shape of the world, boy. Do you understand me? Not your world, the world." "No," Harry said, "I don't understand it, not yet." He looked from the director to Ironclaw to the impossible parchment, and he made himself say the next part plainly because he had decided in the kitchen that he was finished being lied to and he would not start lying to himself. but I'm going to. I learned things. It's the only thing I've ever been good at because it's the only thing they couldn't stop me doing." He drew a breath. "So someone is going to teach me all of this, the houses, the law, the clock, the men in the fine robes who keep asking if I'm dead, and whoever's been spending my money while I ate scraps in a cupboard, someone is going to show me exactly who and exactly how much and exactly what the law lets me do about it." For the second time that afternoon, Ironclaw made the sound that was almost delight. Ragnock did not smile. Harry would learn that the director almost never did. But he stepped back from the table and he regarded the boy in the outgrown jumper for a moment, and then he inclined his head, the iron crown dipping a precise and deliberate degree, the gesture of a sovereign acknowledging that another sovereign has entered the room. "The bank," said Ragnock, "will teach you everything. The bank will arm you and account to you and stand at your shoulder in rooms where wizards have never let our kind stand. We will do this gladly, Heir Potter, and we will do it for reasons of our own, which I will lay before you honestly before you sign a single line, because I do not deal in the gratitude of children, I deal in contracts between equals." He turned for the door and the light bent with him. "Ironclaw, bring him bread and clean water first. He has not eaten, and a lord does not study hungry. Then bring the books, all of them." At the door he paused and looked back, and the old dark eyes glittered. "We will begin," said the director of Gringotts, "with the names of the men who hoped he would never come." The door with teeth closed behind him. And Harry Potter, 8 years old, sat alone with a goblin and a curse breaker and 100 years of stolen fortune spread out across a table, and felt the cupboard door, the real one, the one inside him, the one he had kept shut by main force his whole life against the thing he was not allowed to want, felt at ease open at last 1 inch on a hinge he had thought rusted shut for good. He did not let it open all the way. He was not a fool. But he let it open the inch, and through the inch came the thing he had locked away the day he stopped crying for Petunia, and the thing was very simple, and it was this: mine. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, heir to everything. The bread came on a wooden board with a wedge of hard yellow cheese and a jug of water so cold it fogged the cup, and Harry ate all of it without once being told to hurry, which was a thing that had never happened to him in his life. He noticed himself noticing it. That was the trouble with being Harry. Some part of him was always standing a little to one side, taking the inventory, and that part observed now that no one had snatched the board away, no one had counted the slices, no one had announced that he was eating them out of house and home. Bill sat across from him with his boots up on the next chair, peeling an orange that had appeared from somewhere in his coat, and Ironclaw stood at the shelves with his back turned, drawing down ledger after ledger and stacking them on the long table where the river of names still lay. "Eat the cheese too," Bill said without looking up from the orange. "You keep eyeing it like it's going to bolt." "It might," Harry said. Bill laughed once, surprised, and tossed him a segment of orange across the table. Harry caught it. He had good hands. You learned good hands fast in a house where dropping a plate had consequences. He ate the orange segment, and it was the best thing he had ever tasted, and he decided not to say so, because saying so out loud felt like the kind of thing that got taken away. Ironclaw set the last ledger on the stack with a thump that raised dust and turned, and the dryness was back in his voice, but underneath it now ran something that hadn't been there before, a current, the eagerness of a craftsman about to show his finest work to the one person in the world equipped to understand it. "Finished," he said. "Good. Then leave the parchment where it is. We are done with what you are, and we move now to what you have. Director instructed me to begin with the men who hoped you would never come. I will disobey him in one particular." He drew a chair to the head of the table and stood behind it rather than sitting. "I will begin with what they hope to keep you from. A thief is more interesting once you know the size of what he stole." He opened the first ledger. It went on for 2 hours, and Harry did not grow bored for 1 second of it, because Ironclaw did not talk to him the way adults talk to children. He talked to him the way one accountant talks to another. Numbers first, sentiment never, every claim sourced to a page he could put a finger on. "House Potter," Ironclaw said, "to begin where you began. Old money, well kept. Your great-grandfather Henry Potter sat on the Wisengamot and refused a peerage 3 times, which tells you something of the family temper. Your grandfather, Fleamont Potter, invented a hair potion called Sleekeasies, which sold to 1 witch in 3 across 2 continents and turned a comfortable fortune into a serious one. He sold the company at the height of the market. The timing was either luck or genius, and the family has always insisted it was genius, and the proceeds came here." He turned the ledger so Harry could see the columns. "This is the Potter main vault. You cannot touch it until you are of age or until you formally claim the lordship, whichever comes first. That is your father's instruction, and we honor it, but you may look at the bottom line." Harry looked at the bottom line. He had taught himself arithmetic out of library books because the Dursleys would not pay for a tutor and the schools was reserved for Dudley, and so he understood, in a way that a less self-taught child might not have, exactly what the number meant. It meant that the Potter family alone, before anything else the parchment had named, was wealthy past the point where the wealth did anything but make more of itself. "That's a lot," Harry said, because pretending otherwise would have been a lie, and he was finished with lies. That is the smallest vault we will discuss today, said Ironclaw. He turned a page. Your trust vault. A separate account established by your parents intended to keep a child in books and broomsticks and pocket money until the main estate opened to him. 1,000 galleons replenished yearly. His finger stopped on a line and his voice cooled by a precise degree. It has not been touched since you were 15 months old, not by you plainly, not by anyone authorized. It sits exactly as it was left, 8 years of replenishment stacked on top of each other, untouched, because the person who was supposed to bring you here to spend it never did. Hold that thought, we return to it. He pulled the next ledger toward him, and this one was older, the leather gone black, the clasp shaped like a closed eye, and when Ironclaw's hand passed over it, the eye opened, looked at Harry, and closed again. House Peveril, he said. The cold light in the chamber seemed to draw in a degree. Harry felt it on the backs of his arms again, the way he had felt it when the parchment wrote the word, a pressure with no source, like standing too near a struck bell after the sound has stopped. There were 3 Peveril brothers, Ironclaw said, in an age so far back that your historians cannot agree on the century, and the goblins can because we were there and we kept the books. Antioch, the eldest, died young and violently, as men who collect enemies tend to. Cadmus the second left no living line, his blood ran out in grief and madness within 3 generations. Ignatus, the youngest, was the cleverest of the 3, which is to say he was the one who lived to be old and died in his bed. He married, he had children, and his children married into a house you have heard of. Ironclaw tapped the open ledger and then tapped the river of names, where near the top, just below Potter, the word P-V-E-R-E-L-L stood in its thickened ink. You are Ignatus Peveril's heir, boy, through your father, through a line that bent and braided and changed its name a dozen times but never once broke. You are the youngest son of the youngest son all the way down for 1,000 years. And the older brother's lines died out, Harry said, following it. Antioch and Cadmus, no heirs, none, so their property fell dormant, like the law you told me about, and it waited for someone of the same blood to claim it. Ironclaw's eyes glittered. Go on. And I'm the only Peveril blood left. Harry sat forward. The arithmetic was assembling itself in his head, clean and terrible. So I don't just get Ignatus's share, I get all 3, the whole house, everything that's been sitting dormant for, he glanced at the deadline that had hung over the whole afternoon, for 100 years and a day. For considerably longer than that, said Ironclaw, though the 100-year clock that nearly beat us applied only to the chief line, which is why today mattered so much. The junior reversions have longer windows or none at all, but you have grasped the shape of it, and you have grasped it faster than the lawyers I have explained it to who were paid by the hour to be slow. He turned the ledger fully toward Harry and laid it flat. This is the Peveril holding, not a vault, vaults, and not only vaults. He began to read, and Harry began to understand that he had never in his life actually known what the word rich meant. It was not gold mostly. That was the first thing that surprised him, and the surprise taught him something. The Potter fortune was gold, heaped and counted, the way a child imagines treasure. The Peveril fortune was something older and quieter and far more dangerous. It was ownership. Land, Ironclaw said, turning pages. The Peverils did not hoard coin, they bought ground and ground breeds. Half the freehold beneath Diagon Alley sits on Peveril soil. Every shop you walk past today, the apothecary, the owl emporium, the place that sells nothing but cauldrons, pays a ground rent. For 100 years they have paid it to the ministry's registrar of dormant houses because the owner was presumed gone. From today they pay it to you. The whole alley, half, the better half. Also a third of Hogsmeade, 2 streets of Nocturne that no respectable person admits to visiting, a stretch of the Cornish coast where the old smuggling families landed their cargo, and an island in the Hebrides that does not appear on any map, magical or otherwise, because the Peverils removed it from the maps and never put it back. Ironclaw turned a page. Bonds. The Peveril estate financed 3 wizarding wars and the rebuilding after each. When the Ministry of Magic was founded, it borrowed against the future to pay for itself, and it borrowed in part from this house. That debt was never retired. It has been quietly rolled over for centuries, the interest compounding because no creditor remained to call it in. He looked up. The Ministry of Magic owes you money, Heir Potter, a great deal of it. We call it, among ourselves, the Crown Debt. There is no one alive in that building who knows it exists, which is precisely how the men who do know it like things. Harry sat with that. Outside this room, somewhere above them, was a whole government that owed him money and did not know it. He turned the fact over and found that it did not make him feel powerful exactly. It made him feel the way he'd felt at the top of the white steps, a long way up, no railing. The Daily Prophet, Ironclaw continued, the only newspaper that matters in this country, was founded with Peveril capital and has never been fully bought out. You hold the controlling share, not a large share, a controlling one, which is a different and better thing. St. Mungo's Hospital was endowed by a Peveril who lost a wife to a curse the healers of the day could not break. The endowment still pays a portion of the hospital's running costs, and the chair of its board has, by the founding charter, always been held or appointed by the senior Peveril heir. That has been you for 8 years, exercised by no one. He turned the last page of the Peveril ledger, and here his voice changed, not colder but graver, the voice of a man approaching the edge of what even he found easy to discuss. And then there is the matter the parchment ended on, the one the director called the change in the shape of the world. Gryffindor, Harry said. Gryffindor. Bill had stopped peeling oranges some time ago. He sat very still now, his boots down off the chair, watching Ironclaw the way a man watches a curse he is not sure has finished going off. You will have been told, if anyone troubled to tell you anything, Ironclaw said, that Hogwarts was built by 4, Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, Salazar Slytherin. What you will not have been told, because almost no one alive knows it and the few who do have reasons to keep it buried, is that the school was not given to the world as a gift. It was founded, and a founding in the old law is not a donation, it is an estate. The 4 founders pooled land and gold and magic into a single great trust, the Hogwarts Endowment, and they wrote a charter, and the charter named heirs. And the heirs own the school, Harry said slowly. The heirs own the foundation. The school sits upon it the way the shops sit upon the alley. The headmaster runs Hogwarts day to day, the board of governors oversees it, but neither the headmaster nor the board owns it, any more than a tenant owns a house. The founders' heirs are the landlords of Hogwarts, and the charter gives them powers that have lain unused for so long that the people now running the school have come to believe, have needed to believe, that the powers lapsed. Ironclaw set his finger on the great deep word at the bottom of the parchment. They did not lapse. They went dormant for want of an heir to wake them. Slytherin's line, you will not be surprised to learn, runs to a family called Gaunt, now extinct in all but the most unfortunate sense, and we will speak of that another day because it touches you more nearly than you would wish. Hufflepuff's and Ravenclaw's heirs are scattered and minor and have never combined, but Gryffindor's line, he tapped the word once, ran through Peveril, through Ignatus, through you. You are not merely a lord today, Heir Potter. You are one of the 4 landlords of the only school of magic in Britain, and you are the only one of the 4 who is awake. The chamber was very quiet. Far above, the great hall counted on, indifferent, and Harry sat in the cold light and felt the size of it settle onto him at last, not as joy and not as fear, but as weight, the plain physical weight of a thing that was now his to carry whether he wanted it or not. He thought about the cupboard. He thought about the list taped to the door. He thought about every adult who had ever looked at him and decided, in the half-second it took to look, that here was a boy who would never amount to anything and need never be accounted for. Show me the ring, Harry said. Ironclaw went still. How do you know there is a ring? There's always a ring, Harry said. In the books, the old houses have a ring. He had read every fantasy the library owned in the cupboard by the light that came under the door, because in the books the lost children turned out to be lords, and he had never once let himself believe it, and now he was sitting in the proof of it, and he wanted to see the ring. Something moved across Ironclaw's shrewd, folded face that was not quite a smile, and was close kin to one. He crossed to the shelves, to a small iron door set flush into the stone that Harry had not noticed, and pressed his palm to it, and it opened on a recess no larger than a fist. From the recess he drew a box of black wood, and from the box, on a bed of grey silk, a ring. It was not gold. Harry had expected gold. It was a dark metal he had no name for, almost black, and set into it was a stone the color of deep water, with something turning slowly in its depths that might have been a flaw and might have been a galaxy. Cut into the band, worn nearly smooth by 1,000 years of hands, was a mark he recognized, a triangle, a circle, a line, the same mark he realized that had been stitched on Bill's coat, the same mark over the silver doors, the mark his eye kept wanting to slide off. The Peveril signet, Ironclaw said, and his dry voice had gone quiet, almost reverent. Older than the bank, older than the ledgers that record it. It cannot be bought, cannot be stolen, cannot be worn by any hand not of the blood. Men have tried, and the trying did not go well for them. It does one thing, and it does it absolutely. It knows the heir. He set the box on the table and pushed it across and stopped and looked Harry in the eye. I will tell you what putting it on means, because no one in this room will ever again let a thing be done to you without telling you first. When you put on that ring, the wards of every Peveril holding will wake. The manor, which has slept time-locked behind its own front door for 100 years, untouched, a single afternoon frozen inside it, will know its lord is alive and begin to stir. The old magic of the house will reach out and find you and settle on you, and it will not come off again until you die or pass it freely to your own heir. It is not jewelry, it is a binding. It is the first irreversible thing you will do today, and I would have you do it with your eyes open or not at all. Harry looked at the ring. The thing turning in the stone turned and seemed for an instant to turn toward him. You said it can't be worn by anyone not of the blood, he said. If I put it on and it doesn't fit, if it rejects me, then the parchment was wrong and none of this is real, and I should go back to Surrey and forget I was ever here. He was watching the goblin's face as he said it. That's the real test, isn't it, not the parchment, this. Ironclaw inclined his head. The parchment reads the blood, the ring reads the line. Blood can be faked in theory by magic we do not credit but cannot rule out. The line cannot. Yes, Heir Potter, this is the real test. And I will tell you a thing I would tell no client I respected less than I have come to respect you in the space of one afternoon. I am not certain. The Peveril reversion has been dormant 100 years. No one has worn this ring in living memory. If you are wrong about yourself, if some clever enemy fed false blood to the parchment to bait a trap, then you will reach for the most powerful object in this bank, and it will do nothing, and you will know exactly how alone you are. It was, Harry thought, the most honest thing anyone had ever said to him. Petunia had lied to make him small. Vernon had shouted to make himself large. Ironclaw simply laid the truth on the table between them and let it be heavy. He thought about the rind of bacon. He thought about you can say no. He picked up the ring. It was warm, like the knife had been warm, warmer than the cold room had any right to make it. He held it for one heartbeat, too, looking at the turning thing in the stone, and then, because hesitating was just a slower way of being afraid, and he had decided in the kitchen that he was done being afraid where people could see, he pushed it onto the forefinger of his right hand. For a moment nothing happened, then the band moved. It contracted smoothly, sizing itself from a grown man's finger to an 8-year-old's, the dark metal flowing like something half alive, until it sat snug and certain against his skin. The stone flared not bright but deep, a pulse of that deep-water color that went out from the ring in a ring of its own, a ripple in the air of the chamber that passed through Harry and through the table and through the stacked ledgers, and Harry felt it pass through him, felt it touch something at the very center of himself that he had not known was there, an old locked room behind the cupboard, and turn a key in it. And then, faint and far and unmistakable, he heard, not with his ears, a sound like a great house drawing its first breath after a long sleep. 100 miles away and 1,000 years deep, behind a front door that had been frozen on a single afternoon for a century, something woke up and knew his name and was glad. The stone settled, the ripple faded. Chamber was as it had been, except that it was not, because the boy at the table was wearing the Peveril signet, and it had not rejected him, and every goblin in the bank would know it before the hour was out. Bill let out a breath he'd been holding. "Merlin," he said softly. "Older than Merlin," said Ironclaw, and for the first time all afternoon he sat, lowering himself into the chair at the head of the table as though his own knees had finally registered the size of the day. "Welcome, Lord Peveril." Welcome home. He did not bow this time. He had bowed already when it was a question. Now it was an answer, and the answer did not require it. Harry looked at the ring on his hand. He flexed the finger. The metal moved with him, warm, certain his. And the thing that had eased open 1 inch in his chest at the end of the test eased open another, and he let it, because the ring had told the truth the parchment only promised, and the truth was that the room behind the cupboard had been there all along, waiting, full of light. He did not cry, but it was a near thing, and he respected himself for the nearness, and then he put it away because there was work to do. "All right," Harry said, "now tell me about the thieves." Ironclaw's face changed. Reverence went out of it and something harder came in, and Harry understood that he had just touched the thing the goblin had been waiting all afternoon to discuss, the thing the director had named at the door. The names of the men who hoped he would never come. "There are 3, Ironclaw said. "I will give you them in ascending order of how angry they should make you, which is also, as it happens, ascending order of how dangerous they are." He drew a fresh ledger from the stack, narrower than the others, bound in red. "The first is a man called Corvus Yaxley. He holds a ministry post registrar of dormant houses. It is a quiet office, unglamorous, the sort of post ambitious men avoid because it never makes the papers. Yaxley wanted it precisely because it never makes the papers. For 11 years he has administered the dormant estates of extinct houses, including, until sundown today, the Peveril ground rents the dormant house yields, the whole stream of money that flows from properties whose owners are presumed gone." He opened the red ledger. "He has been skimming it, not crudely. A man who skimmed crudely would have been caught by an audit. Yaxley skims the way a careful tenant lets a house fall into disrepair, slowly, deniably, a percentage here, a maintenance charge there, a yield reported as lower than it was, and the difference vanishing into accounts that wind through 3 countries before they go quiet. We have watched him do it for 11 years. "You watched him," Harry said, "and you didn't stop him." "We could not," Ironclaw said, and there was old anger in it, anger worn smooth by long use. "The dormant accounts were not in our custody. Your ministry took the administration of dormant houses out of goblin hands 400 years ago after the last war as a condition of peace. They did not trust us to hold property that might one day be a wizard's. So we kept our own books in this room in red, and we watched a ministry functionary bleed estates we would have defended to the last nut, and we could do nothing but record it. Recording it is what we do. We are very good at it." He turned the ledger so Harry could see the columns, 11 years of careful theft laid out in goblin script. "This is why the bank's interests and yours run together, Heir Potter, and why I will not pretend otherwise to win your trust. Every reversion you file pulls a dormant estate out of Yaxley's reach and back under this roof, under our hands, where it belongs. You restore our honor and our custody. We arm you and account to you and stand at your shoulder. Neither of us is doing the other a kindness. We are doing each other a deal. The director prefers it that way, and so, I suspect, to you." "I do," Harry said. He was looking at the red columns. "Keep going. That's the one who's least dangerous. Who's next?" Ironclaw drew the second ledger. This one was bound in green, and the clasp was a serpent eating its tail. Lucius Malfoy, he said. An old name, real money, a great deal of influence bought with both. He sits as chair of the Hogwarts Board of Governors, which you will appreciate the irony of within the week. He holds proxy votes in the Wisengamot for a fistful of minor houses, several of which are dormant houses. He has no lawful right to vote at all proxies he simply assumed when their owners died out, on the theory that no one would ever come to take them back. He has been wrong about that since approximately 2 o'clock this afternoon. A dry flicker, but the proxies are the small crime. The large one is older. In the war, the one that ended the night your parents died, the Malfoy fortune very nearly didn't survive. Lucius backed the wrong side, spent enormously, and found himself in the winter of 1979 badly short of liquid gold at exactly the moment he needed to buy his way clear of certain accusations. He came here, he borrowed. Harry went very still. From a Potter vault, from your father. Ironclaw's voice was flat as slate. James Potter, who was young and rich and reckless, and had a sense of humor that the family records suggest was the death of his dignity on several occasions, lent Lucius Malfoy a sum of gold large enough to save the house of Malfoy from ruin. He did it, as far as we can tell, partly out of an old family obligation, and partly because he found the idea of Lucius Malfoy being privately in his debt extremely funny. He secured the loan against Malfoy property, a portion of the Malfoy estate itself, pledged as collateral, recorded here, witnessed by this bank. He tapped the green ledger. The loan was never repaid. James Potter died 18 months later. The debt passed into the estate, into trust here with everything else, and the man who was supposed to administer your affairs, the man who sealed your father's will, allowed that debt to go quietly unenforced for 8 years, until everyone who might remember it was dead or distracted, while Lucius Malfoy walked the corridors of power as one of the richest men in Britain, on a fortune that is, in significant part, yours unpaid. The cold light hung over the table. Harry looked at the green ledger, at the serpent eating its tail, and felt the thing he had been waiting all afternoon to feel and had been almost afraid would not come. It was not rage. Rage was hot, and Harry had learned in the cupboard that hot things burned the person holding them first. What he felt was cold and clear and very, very patient, like the deep water turning in the stone of his ring. And the third, Harry said. His voice did not change at all, and he watched both Ironclaw and Bill notice that it did not change, and noticed that the not changing was worse than shouting would have been. The one who should make me angriest, the one who sealed my father's will, the one who let the Malfoy debt sleep and let Yaxley skim and never once came to bring me to the trust vault that's been sitting full for 8 years while I ate scraps. He already knew. He had known since Ironclaw said the word sealed. But he wanted the goblin to say the name, because saying it would make it real, and Harry was done with things that were not real. Ironclaw drew the third ledger. It was bound in plain gray, the most ordinary of all of them, and that Harry would understand later was the most frightening thing about it. The other thieves had announced themselves in serpents and red ink. This one had hidden in the plainest binding on the shelf. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, Ironclaw said. Chief Warlock of the Wisengamot, Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, Headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, which is to say, the tenant who runs the house you have just discovered you own. He opened the grey ledger. After your parents died, your father's will was lodged here, as all such wills are. It named your guardians. It named specifically and in writing the people your parents wished you raised by, and it named specifically and in writing several people they wished you never left with. The will was scheduled to be read within the month, as the law requires. His finger stopped on a line, and beside it in the margin was a wax seal Harry recognized, not the crown G of the bank, but a different mark, a phoenix, pressed into red. It was never read. 3 days after your parents' deaths, the chief warlock of the Wisengamot exercised an emergency power, a real power lawfully his, intended for cases of war and chaos, of which there was admittedly no shortage that week, and sealed it. Sealed your parents' last wishes, sealed the instructions for your care, and then by an authority he asserted and no one was positioned to question, he placed you with your mother's sister. Ironclaw looked up, and his dark eyes held Harry's. I have read your father's will, Heir Potter. I am one of 3 living beings who has. I will not tell you its contents today. You are 8 years old and you have carried enough for one afternoon. But I will tell you this much, because you have earned one true thing more before we stop. He paused. Your parents' will names the Dursleys explicitly. It names them in the list of people you were never, under any circumstances, to be left with. The chamber was silent. Harry sat with the ring warm on his hand and the grey ledger opened before him and the phoenix seal read in the margin, and he did not shout, and he did not cry, and he did not say any of the dozen things a smaller boy might have said. He had stopped, years ago, giving people the sound. He gave them nothing now either. He simply turned the fact over the way he turned everything over, examining it from every side, until he understood it completely, and when he understood it completely he set it down inside himself in the cold, clear, patient place beside the deep water, and he looked up. He pays them, Harry said. Ironclaw blinked. It was the first time all afternoon the goblin had been the one surprised. Explain. You said the trust vault gets 1,000 galleons a year and nobody touched it. But somebody's been paying the Dursleys. They complain about money all the time, about how much I cost, but they never actually went without anything because of me, ever. They got a new car the year I started school. Petunia got the conservatory. He was assembling it as he spoke, fast, the pieces clicking. If he sealed the will and put me there, he had to make them keep me. The Dursleys would never keep a thing that cost them money, so he's been paying them a stipend for my care. His voice was perfectly level, and they took it and spent it on Dudley, and gave me the cupboard and the scraps and the list on the door. So somewhere there's a fourth ledger, the one that shows a great and good man paying my aunt and uncle to keep me small. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Ironclaw closed the gray ledger slowly, and looked across the table at the 8-year-old boy in the outgrown jumper with the most powerful signet in Britain on his hand. And on the goblin's shrewd folded face there was no delight now, and no dryness, but something rarer and harder to earn, respect. The flat, unsentimental respect of one professional for another who has just seen, unprompted, the thing it took the professional 11 years of watching to learn. "There is a fourth ledger," Ironclaw said quietly. "It is exactly as you describe. He did not pay it from your trust. He is too careful for that and too clever. It would have left a mark we could have used. He paid it from a discretionary fund of the Hogwarts endowment, the foundation you now partone, which means, Lord Peveril, that for 8 years Albus Dumbledore has been paying your jailers out of your own pocket." He laid both hands flat on the stacked ledgers, the whole afternoon's worth, the fortune and the theft of it. "Now, you ask me at the end of the test who had been spending it. I have answered you. The question that remains, the only question, the question the bank has waited 100 years to put to a Peveril who could finally answer it, is what you intend to do." Harry looked at the ledgers. He looked at the ring. He looked at Bill, who had gone quiet and serious, and at the door with teeth, beyond which a whole world was going about its evening, certain that the boy who lived was a nobody, safely tucked away in Surrey. "I'm 8, Harry said. "You are. I can't just walk into the Wisengamot and start taking things back. There'll be laws, guardianship. A child can't hold a lordship and act on it alone. There'll be some rule. There's always a rule. They'll have built rules exactly so a boy like me can't do exactly this." He was thinking out loud now, and the thinking had a momentum to it, an engine turning over and catching. "So before I take back a single galleon, I need to know the rules better than the people who wrote them. All of them. Heir law, Wisengamot procedure. Every loophole, every precedent, every emergency power like the one Dumbledore used. Because the only reason any of them got away with this is that nobody who could read the law was watching." He looked up, and his green eyes were very clear and very cold and very young. "So that's what I want from the deal. Not just gold and goblins at my shoulder. I want to be taught. I want a tutor for the law and a tutor for the politics, and I want you personally for the money, and I want it to start tomorrow. And I want to be the most dangerous thing in any room I walk into long before any of them realize the room has a door." Ironclaw was silent. Then slowly he reached into his gray coat and drew out a single folded sheet of parchment, blank, and a quill, and a knife, a smaller cousin of the one Harry had already bled on, and laid all three on the table between them. "The bank anticipated," he said, "that you would ask for something of the sort. The director drafted terms an hour ago, on the strength of a parchment and a guess. I told him he was being sentimental, betting the bank's resources on a child he had met for the length of a sentence. A flicker very nearly warm. I will tell him this evening that he was right and I was wrong, and he will enjoy that more than is decent. The contract is this, and I will read every line aloud, because no one in this room will ever again let a thing be signed in front of you that has not first been read to you in plain words." He read it aloud, every line. It took 20 minutes, and Harry stopped him 4 times to ask what a clause meant, and twice to change one, and once, over a provision about the bank's fees on reclaimed estates, to negotiate the percentage down by half a point, because he had decided that a lord who let the first number stand was a lord who would always be given the first number, and Ironclaw conceded the half point with an expression that on a human face would have been a grin. When it was read and changed and read again, Harry picked up the smaller knife and pricked his thumb on the same spot that had already healed, and signed the contract in blood beneath the seal of the bank, and Ironclaw countersigned in goblin script, and the parchment sealed itself with a sound like a vault door closing very far away. "It is done," said Ironclaw. "You are the bank's client and the bank's ally on terms between equals." He gathered the ledgers, all of them, the gold and the theft and the gray one with the phoenix seal. "Tonight you sleep somewhere that is yours, under wards no one in Surrey could break with a season to try. Tomorrow we begin. Heir law before breakfast, because the director believes a man should learn his rights while he is still hungry enough to want them. A solicitor by noon. There is a man named Tobias Hale, half-blood, dual qualified in your law and the goblins both, honest to the point of inconvenience, whom I have already taken the liberty of summoning. By the end of the week your first reversions will be filed, and Corvus Yaxley will look at his Morning Post and feel, for the first time in 11 years, a draft from a door he thought was sealed." He stood, and the afternoon was over, and the evening, the first evening of the rest of it, was beginning. Harry stood too. The ring was warm on his hand. Far away behind a frozen door, a house that was his breathed in the dark and waited for its lord to come home. "One more thing," Harry said at the door with teeth, and Ironclaw turned. "Dumbledore, the fourth ledger. You said he paid them from the endowment, which I part-own, so it's my money he used to keep me small." Let the cold, clear, patient thing show in his face, just for a moment, just for the goblin who had earned the right to see it. "When the time comes, and it will, and I'll know when, I don't want to ruin him in a way that looks like a child's revenge. I want to ruin him with his own law, the same emergency power he used to seal the will. I want to take it apart in front of the people who trust him, slowly, until there's nothing left for anyone to argue with. Can you teach me how to do that?" Ironclaw of Gringotts looked at Harry Potter for a long moment. "Lord Peveril," he said, "it will be my very great pleasure." The door with teeth opened, and Harry walked out of the chamber a different creature than the boy who had walked in, not richer, though he was that beyond counting, and not safer, though he was that too, but armed at last with the only weapon Privet Drive had never managed to take from him, and which he had just discovered was the most dangerous weapon in the world when it finally had something worth aiming at. He knew things, and now, for the first time in his life, he had the standing to use them. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Quiet reclamation. The house woke the moment Harry crossed the threshold, and he felt it do it, the way he had felt the manor wake 100 miles off, but this was nearer and louder, and it was under his feet. Number 12, Peveril Row, stood in a fold of magical London that the Muggles walked past every day without seeing, a narrow, tall house of dark brick between a print shop and a place that mended cauldrons, with iron railings and a black door, and a knocker shaped like a closed eye. Ironclaw had brought him there the first night, after the contract, after the long, strange walk through an evening alley where the lamplighters were lighting lamps with their wands, and no one knew the boy passing under them on the ground they stood on. The goblin had pressed Harry's ringed hand to the door, and the closed-eye knocker had opened, looked at him, and the door had swung inward on a hall that had been waiting in the dark for 100 years. Dust sheets lay over the furniture like snow. The air smelled of cold stone and old paper, and faintly of lavender, as though the last person to leave had been a woman who liked the smell of it, and the house had remembered her. As Harry stepped inside, the sconces along the hall caught fire one after another, blue-white, climbing the stairs ahead of him, and the dust sheets stirred and slid to the floor and folded themselves into neat squares, and somewhere deep in the house, a clock that had been stopped for a century began, very quietly, to tick. "It knows you," Ironclaw said behind him, watching the house remember how to be alive. "Houses of the old blood are half awake, even sleeping. They wait. This one has waited longer than most." Harry stood in the hall of the first place that had ever been his, and he did not say thank you, because the house was not a gift and Ironclaw was not the giver, and because thank you was a word he had learned to use as a shield, and he did not need a shield here. He said instead the truest thing he had, "I'll take care of it." And the clock deep in the house ticked on, and the lavender smell grew a little stronger, as though somewhere a long-dead woman had heard and been glad. Tobias Hale arrived at 9 the next morning, and Harry liked him within the first minute, which surprised him, because he had not planned to like anyone. Hale was a tall, stooped man of perhaps 50, in a good suit gone slightly shiny at the elbows, with ink on his fingers and spectacles pushed up into gray hair, and the harassed, contented look of a man who finds the law genuinely interesting and is faintly amazed to be paid for thinking about it. Came into the breakfast room where Harry was eating toast, real toast, as much as he wanted, a fact Harry was still privately astonished by, set down a case that bulged with parchment, looked at the 8-year-old at the head of the table, and did not do any of the things adults did. He did not crouch to be at eye level. He did not call Harry young man. He did not glance at Ironclaw to confirm that the child was really to be consulted. He sat down, accepted a cup of tea, and said, "Right. Your account manager tells me you want to learn the law of inheritance well enough to take apart the chief warlock of the Wisengamot with it. I've been a solicitor for 26 years, and that is comfortably the most interesting instruction I have ever received. Where would you like to begin?" "At the beginning," Harry said. "Assume I know nothing, because I don't, but don't explain things twice, because I won't need it." Hale's eyebrows went up a fraction. He pulled a fat book from the case, set it on the table, and opened it. "We'll see," he said, not unkindly, in the tone of a man who has heard children make promises before. By noon he had stopped saying "we'll see." The weeks that followed were the happiest of Harry's life, which was a low bar, but they would have cleared a high one too. He learned the way a starving man eats. Hale came every morning with the law, and Ironclaw came most afternoons with the money, and between them they poured 8 years of withheld knowledge into a mind that had been built, in the dark of the cupboard, into something purpose-made to receive it. Harry had spent his whole life with nothing to think about but the rules of a hostile house, and he had become, without anyone noticing, a connoisseur of rules, of how they were written, where they bent, which ones were enforced and which were merely threatened, who benefited from each and who paid. The law of magical Britain turned out to be exactly the same game played for higher stakes, and he had been training for it since he was old enough to read the list on the cupboard door. "Heir law," Hale said the first morning. The bones of it, a wizarding house is not a family. It is a legal person like a company. If you've read about those, that happens to be made of people. It owns property, holds seats, incurs debts, and persists after any individual member dies. The current head of the house is its lord or lady, and the lord speaks for the house in all things, in the Wisengamot before the law at the bank. An heir is the next in line, with limited powers until he claims the lordship. And I've claimed Peveril, Harry said. The ring, you've claimed Peveril, which is why we have a very interesting problem and a very interesting solution. Hale turned a page. The problem, you are 8. The law says a minor cannot exercise the full powers of a lordship, cannot vote his seats, cannot dispose of estate property, cannot sue or be sued until he comes of age at 17 or is emancipated. They wrote that rule for good reasons and one bad one. The good reasons are obvious. You don't let children sell the family castle. The bad one is the one that should interest you. He looked over his spectacles. The rule means that for 9 years, someone else exercises the powers in the minor's name, a regent, a guardian of the estate, and whoever holds that office holds in practice everything the minor owns. Do you see why that should interest you? Because that's the prize, Harry said slowly. That's what they'll fight over, not me, the regency. Whoever gets named guardian of the estate gets to vote the Peveril seats and the reverted seats and sit on the Hogwarts Foundation in my name for 9 years. The pieces clicked. Dumbledore, the emergency custody, that's what he'll go for, not to protect me, to be my regent. Hale set down his tea. Mr. Potter, he said, I have explained that point to grown clients who took a week to understand it. You understood it in a sentence. I am going to enjoy this enormously, and I am also, I confess, a little frightened of you, and I want you to take that as the compliment it is. Harry took it as the compliment it was. So what's the solution? The solution, said Hale, is that the rule has an exception, and the exception is so old that almost everyone has forgotten it, which is precisely how the goblins like their best weapons. A minor cannot exercise a lordship. But the estate must be administered by someone, and the law allows the holder of the lordship to name a conservator, a manager of the property, who acts on instruction and may be bound by contract. The conservator runs the estate, the minor instructs the conservator, and crucially the conservator may be a bank. You have already done this, by the way. The contract you signed appoints Gringotts as conservator of the Peveril and Potter estates. Which means that the prize Dumbledore wants, control of your property through a regency, you have already given to someone he cannot capture, cannot intimidate, and cannot outvote, a goblin bank that would sooner go to war than surrender a client's estate to a wizard. You did it on the first afternoon, before you knew what it meant. The goblins knew exactly what it meant. That is why the director bet the bank on you. Harry sat with that. He looked at Ironclaw, who had come in quietly and was leaning against the doorframe with an expression of deep professional satisfaction. You knew, Harry said, when you read me the contract, that clause about the bank being conservator, you read it like it was ordinary. It was ordinary, Ironclaw said. For us, it is the most extraordinary thing in the document for you. I did not draw your attention to it because I wanted to see whether you would draw your own. He inclined his head. You asked me to change 2 clauses and negotiate a third. You left the conservatorship exactly as written. You understood it. I have rarely been more pleased to lose half a point of fees. Harry permitted himself in the privacy of the breakfast room a single thin satisfied smile, the first he could remember producing on purpose. Then he put it away and turned back to Hale and said, Good, then we're protected. Now teach me how to attack. They began with the small things because Ironclaw believed in small things and Harry was learning to as well. A general who wins his first battle wins his second more easily, the goblin said. Not because the second is smaller, but because the world has learned that he wins. We will reclaim something tiny and unarguable first. We will do it perfectly. And the doing of it will teach the men who profit from your sleep that you have woken up and that you do not make mistakes. The something tiny was a ground rent. There was a shop in Diagon Alley, 3 doors down from the bank, that sold quills and ink and fine parchment, run by a nervous round man named Mr. Tolliver, whose family had held the shop for 4 generations. Mr. Tolliver paid a ground rent on the freehold beneath his shop, 11 galleons a quarter, and for a century he had paid it, like every shopkeeper on that side of the alley, to the ministry's registrar of dormant houses, who collected it on behalf of an owner presumed long gone. The owner was Harry. You will not raise his rent, Ironclaw instructed, on the morning they went to do it. You will not change his terms by a single nut. A landlord who reveals himself by squeezing is a landlord who creates enemies. You will do the opposite. Watch. They went to the shop, Harry, Ironclaw, and Hale with his bulging case, and Mr. Tolliver came out from behind his counter wringing his hands at the sight of a goblin and a solicitor, because a goblin and a solicitor together meant trouble in his experience, and his experience was usually right. It was Hale who spoke, gently. He explained that the freehold beneath the shop had passed to its rightful owner, that the rightful owner was the boy beside him, that the ministry had been collecting Mr. Tolliver's rent on behalf of an estate it had no further right to administer, and that from this quarter, the rent would be paid instead to the house of Peveril, directly at the bank. Mr. Tolliver's face did several things, most of them fearful, and Harry, who had spent his whole life reading the faces of people who held power over him, read this one easily and understood that the man was bracing for the squeeze, for the new young landlord to double the rent, or shorten the lease, or find a reason to turn out a family that had sold quills on that spot for 4 generations. So Harry spoke. It was the first time he had spoken as a landlord, and he had thought about what to say. "Mr. Tolliver," he said, "your rent stays the same, 11 galleons a quarter, your lease stays the same, nothing changes for you except the name on the receipt." He paused. "There's one more thing, the ministry's been collecting your rent for 100 years on behalf of an owner who wasn't there. Some of that money was supposed to go to the upkeep of the buildings, the roofs, the foundations, the wards along the alley. Didn't the man who collected it kept it, so your roof leaks, doesn't it, in the back over the stockroom? You lose parchment to the damp every winter." Mr. Tolliver stared. "How did you?" "Because that's what happens when a landlord doesn't spend the upkeep he collects," Harry said. "I'm going to spend it. The Peveril estate will repair the roofs and the wards on every freehold it holds in this alley, starting with the ones that leak. It comes out of my pocket, not yours. You'll have a dry stockroom by winter." He held out his hand, the way Hale had taught him, the way a lord did. "I'd rather have tenants who do well than tenants who are afraid of me. Afraid tenants cheat you the first chance they get. Tenants who do well make you rich for 100 years. My family understood that once. I'd like to start understanding it again." Mr. Tolliver shook the hand of an 8-year-old boy as though he were not quite sure it was happening, and by the time they left the shop he was no longer afraid, and word of the exchange, Harry had counted on this, was halfway up the alley before they reached the bank. "That," said Ironclaw with quiet approval, "was not how I would have done it. I would have collected the rent and said nothing. Your way costs gold on the roofs." He paused. "Your way also buys you 40 shopkeepers who will, within the month, be telling everyone who comes into their shops that the new Lord Peveril is fair and generous and frighteningly well informed about their roofs. I have spent my life learning the value of gold. I had forgotten, perhaps, the value of being spoken well of by 40 people who serve tea to the whole of magical Britain across their counters every day." He looked up at Harry. "You did not forget it because you have spent your life being spoken ill of by 3. You know exactly what it is worth. I will remember that lesson, Lord Peveril. I am old and I do not learn many new ones." Harry said nothing, but he carried the goblin's words home and kept them, because they were the kind of lesson he would need again. The Daily Prophet was the first reclamation that frightened him, and he reclaimed it anyway, because Hale taught him that a weapon you are afraid to hold is a weapon your enemy will use on you instead. "The controlling share in the Prophet has sat in your Peveril holdings for a century," Hale explained, the morning they took it. "Voted by no one because no one knew it was there to vote. The paper has been run in practice by its editor and its largest active shareholder, and the largest active shareholder is a consortium that includes, you will not be surprised to learn, men friendly to Lucius Malfoy. They have never owned the paper. They have simply behaved as though they did, because the only person who could contradict them was asleep in a vault. You are about to wake up in the middle of their boardroom. They did not storm in." That was not Harry's way, and it was certainly not Ironclaw's. Hale sent a single letter sealed by the bank, exercising the voting rights of the Peveril share and requesting, as was the controlling shareholder's plain right, the paper's accounts, its editorial charter, and the minutes of every board meeting for the past 10 years. He did not threaten. He did not fire anyone. He merely asked in the politest possible language for the things a controlling owner was entitled to see, and copied the request, as had become his elegant habit, to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The reply came back within the day, and it was a panic dressed as a welcome. "They've offered me a seat on the board," Harry said, reading it at the breakfast table, "and a private briefing for the young Lord Peveril at his convenience. And they want to know, very politely, what my intentions for the paper are. They want to know whether you mean to clean house," said Hale, "because they have spent 10 years printing what their friends wished printed and burying what their friends wished buried, and they have just learned that the floor they have been dancing on belongs to a child they cannot bribe and cannot frighten and cannot, crucially, predict." Harry set the letter down. He had read the Prophet in the bank's archives, a week of it, going back years, learning how it lied, which was rarely by printing falsehoods and mostly by choosing what to print and what to leave in the dark, exactly the way Petunia had run number 4. He understood the paper completely, because the paper was a house held up by what its readers believed, and Harry had spent 8 years being the crack in exactly that kind of plaster. "Tell them my intentions for the paper are that it stopped being a weapon for the man who let my father's debt sleep," Harry said. "But don't tell them that yet. Tell them for now that the young Lord Peveril intends nothing at all and looks forward to a long and quiet relationship with the board." He looked up, and the cold, clear, patient thing was in his eyes. "A weapon is most useful when the other side thinks it's still in the drawer. Lucius Malfoy is about to find out the Prophet isn't his. I'd rather he found it out the day I need him to, and not a day before." Hale smiled the smile of a man watching a chess player 2 moves further along than he is. I will draft something soothing and meaningless, he said. It is one of my great skills, 26 years of it. So the most powerful newspaper in Britain quietly changed hands, and not a single reader noticed, and not a single word in it changed. Yet, and the only mark of it anywhere in the world was a line in the bank's ledger, in goblin script, and a draft of cold air through a boardroom where, for 10 years, men had been very comfortable indeed. There was a morning in the third week when Harry stopped one of Hale's lessons in its tracks, and the stopping told the solicitor more about the boy than anything that had come before. They were on the law of escheat, the precise mechanism by which a dead house's property fell to the crown, and Hale was reciting the standard rule that a reversion claim had to be filed within the century and a day when Harry held up a hand. That's not what the statute says, Harry said. It's what everyone treats it as saying. They're not the same thing. You read it to me yesterday, the actual words. It says the claim must be commenced within the century and a day. Not completed, not filed, commenced. And there's a definition of commence 3 sections later in the part about ordinary lawsuits that nobody's ever bothered to read across, because why would you read the lawsuit section when you're doing escheat? But the definitions section says it applies to the whole act unless stated otherwise, and it isn't stated otherwise. He looked up, so reversion is commenced the moment the blood heir asserts the claim, even verbally, even to the bank, not the moment the paperwork lands on Yaxley's desk, which means the clock on the Peveril reversion didn't stop when we filed last week. It stopped the afternoon I bled on the parchment and told Ironclaw it was mine. We had more time than everyone thinks. We've always had more time. And so does every dormant house I haven't reached yet, as long as I assert the claim before the day runs out, even if the filing takes months. Hale was silent for a long moment. Then he took off his spectacles and polished them and put them back on and looked at the 8-year-old across the table as though seeing him properly for the first time. I have practiced inheritance law for 26 years, Hale said slowly. I have argued escheat before the Wisengamot's own bench. And I have never once read the definition of commence across from the lawsuit section, because as you say, why would you? He shook his head. You are correct, you are completely correct, and it changes the timing of perhaps a dozen claims I had written off as lapsed, and it means several houses I told you were lost to the crown forever are in fact still yours for the taking. He laughed, short and disbelieving. Mr. Potter, I am going to stop being surprised by you, because the surprise is becoming a full-time occupation and I have other clients. But I want it on the record before I stop that you have just found in 3 weeks a hole in the law that the entire profession has walked past for 200 years, and that you found it by reading the boring section. Remember that when you're grown and they call you a prodigy. You're not a prodigy, you just read the boring section. It's a far more dangerous thing to be. Harry kept that, and it became in time one of the rules he lived by, that the power was almost never in the part everyone read. It was in the boring section, the cross-reference, the definition 3 sections later, the thing the clever men had skipped because they were too clever to be thorough. He reclaimed a Diagon Alley property that week, and it was the first reclamation that required him to be cold to someone's face, and he learned that he could be. The property was a narrow, lightless building 3 turns down a street respectable people pretended not to know, and it had been squatted for 11 years by a man called Mundungus Fletcher, a sallow, shifty trader in things that had usually belonged to someone else, who had moved in when the dormant house's wards thinned and had been running a fences trade out of it ever since, paying no one because the owner was presumed gone. The owner was Harry. They went to it, Harry and Hale and Ironclaw, and Fletcher met them in the doorway with the wheedling cheer of a man who has talked his way out of worse, and he looked at the goblin and the solicitor and the child and decided visibly that the child was the soft spot. Now see, there's been a misunderstanding, Fletcher began, smiling at Harry, crouching to his level in the way Harry despised. This here's my place, been my place for years, and I don't know what these gentlemen told you, Sonny, but don't crouch, Harry said, and don't call me Sonny. You have 11 years of unpaid occupation of a Peveril freehold, Mr. Fletcher, and a trade out of it that I'd guess the Department of Magical Law Enforcement would find interesting, given the inventory I can see behind you, half of which still got the previous owner's marks on it. Fletcher's smile slipped. Here's the arithmetic. I could have you arrested for the trade and sued for 11 years of back rent, and I'd win both, and you know I'd win both, because the goblin standing next to me has the deed and the solicitor has the writ and I have the patience. That's the expensive door for you, or, Harry let it hang. You leave today. You leave the marked goods, which aren't yours, for the bank to return to whoever they belong to. And in exchange I don't send the writ or the orders, and you walk away owing me nothing but the favor of being somewhere else. That's the cheap door. I'd take the cheap door, Mr. Fletcher. They don't come along often for men in your trade, and I'm only offering it because chasing you would cost me an afternoon I'd rather spend on bigger thieves than you. Mundungus Fletcher looked at the boy for a long moment, and whatever he had expected to find behind the green eyes, it was not what he found, and he took the cheap door and was gone within the hour, and the narrow, lightless building came back to its lawful owner without a hex thrown. You frightened him, Ironclaw observed with approval as the wards of the reclaimed house woke to Harry's ring. I gave him a choice and made the maths obvious, Harry said. That's all frightening is when you do it properly, not shouting. Just showing someone the numbers and letting them do the sum themselves. He looked into the dark building that was now his. Vernon used to shout. It never frightened me, not really, because shouting's just a man who's run out of better moves. The maths is the frightening thing. I learned that from the cupboard too. There was always enough for 3. He turned away. I'm done being the 4th column that didn't add up. Now I'm the one holding the ledger. The dormant houses were next, and they were not small, and they were the real beginning of it. Hale brought the list, the column the parchment had written, transcribed and sorted and cross-referenced against the bank's records and the ministry's registry, and they went through it together at the long table in number 12, evening after evening, candle after candle, deciding which to reclaim first and how. Reversion is a filing, not a fight, Hale explained. If your claim is good and the parchment makes every one of these airtight, then the law requires the registrar of dormant houses to process it. He cannot refuse a valid reversion. He can only delay it, lose it, query it, demand additional proof, and otherwise behave like every functionary who has ever sat on a desk between a citizen and his rights. So we do not file one grand claim that he can bury. We file them in a particular order for particular reasons, and we make each one impossible to delay without the delay itself becoming evidence. Evidence of what? Of obstruction, said Hale, with the quiet relish of a man laying a trap he has built carefully. Mr. Yaxley has been skimming dormant estates for 11 years. The moment a valid heir appears and starts reclaiming them, every nut he stole becomes recoverable, and every day he delays a valid reversion is a day he is unlawfully retaining property that is now provably yours. He will want to delay because every reclaimed estate is one he can no longer skim and one whose books might reveal what he took. But if he delays a claim the law says he cannot delay, he commits an offense. So we file claims that are perfect. We file them in writing, witnessed, copied to the bank and to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement as a courtesy. And then we wait and we time him, and whatever he does, he loses. If he processes them, you get your estates. If he delays them, he hands us the rope. Hale smiled. It is the most elegant thing I have built in 26 years, and I did not build it. He did 11 years ago, every time he reached into a dormant vault. We are merely the first people ever to be in a position to notice. They filed the first reversion on a Tuesday. House Rookwood Minor, extinct, a manor in Yorkshire gone to the bracken, and a vault with a respectable balance, reverted to Peveril, clean and unarguable. The claim drawn so tight that Yaxley processed it within the week rather than risk the alternative. The Yorkshire Manors wards woke to Harry's ring the way number 12 had. The vault opened to his hand. They filed the second on the Thursday after, House Belby. Then House Travers, dormant 50 years, a townhouse in Bath and a portfolio of ministry bonds. Then 3 more in a week, each perfect, each impossible to refuse and dangerous to delay. And Harry watched the column of names on the parchment begin one by one to glow faintly gold as each house came home. The parchment's own quiet record of a fortune reassembling itself under a single hand, and with each reclaimed house came a seat. That was the thing Hale had been building toward, the thing that made the dormant houses different in kind, not just in size, from a leaking roof on the alley. Every noble house held a seat in the Wisengamot, a vote in the only legislature that governed magical Britain. Dormant houses' seats had been parceled out as proxies, voted by men like Lucius Malfoy who had assumed them when no one was left to object. Each reversion did not merely return a manor and a vault. It returned a vote and stripped it from whoever had been casting it in the dark. By my count, Hale said one evening, going down the glowing column, when these are processed you will hold through Potter, through Peveril, and through the reverted houses somewhere between 19 and 23 seats in the Wisengamot. The number depends on how several contested reversions resolve. Harry looked up from the ledger. How many seats are there in total, in the full Wisengamot? Around 50 active when everyone troubles to attend, which they rarely do. A working majority on most days is a dozen or fewer. The candle burned between them. Outside, magical London went about its evening, certain that nothing had changed. So when they're all processed, Harry said quietly, I'll control more votes than anyone else in the chamber, by a lot, more than the factions, more than Dumbledore's block. Possibly more than the rest of them put together on a normal day, when half of them don't bother to show up. Yes, said Hale, quite possibly. You will be, in the most literal arithmetical sense, the most powerful single voice in the government of magical Britain. He took off his spectacles and polished them, and for once the harassed contentment had gone out of him, replaced by something more sober. I want you to understand what that means, Mr. Potter, because you are 8, and the men who will shortly try to take this from you have spent their whole lives in rooms where that kind of power is the only thing that is real. The moment the Wisengamot's clerks process these reversions, every important person in this country will know that an unknown heir has woken up holding the balance of the chamber. They will not know it is a child. They will not know it is you. But they will move, all of them, the instant they know it exists, to capture it or destroy it or befriend it, depending on their nature. The quiet part of this is ending. You should enjoy these last weeks of it. Harry looked at the glowing column. He thought about the cupboard and the list on the door and the 8 years of a trust vault sitting full while he ate scraps and a great good man paying his jailers out of his own pocket. He thought about they will move, all of them. Good, he said, let them. He went to the manor on the last quiet weekend before any of it broke. Ironclaw took him by a goblin road that did not appear on maps, and they came out of a fold in the world onto a high green headland over a gray northern sea, and there, where there had been nothing the moment before, stood Peveril Manor. It was not large, as the manors of the rich go. It was old in a way that made size irrelevant, a long low house of pale stone the color of bone, grown over with a century of ivy, its windows dark, its door shut on the single frozen afternoon that had waited inside it for 100 years. As Harry came up the path, the ivy stirred, though there was no wind, and the windows kindled one after another with the same blue-white light that had climbed the stairs of number 12, and the door, which had been locked by no key, only by time, knew his ring and opened. Inside, the frozen afternoon thawed. He walked through rooms where dust had been about to settle for 100 years and now settled, where a fire that had been banked a century ago caught and burned, where a tea tray someone had set down on the last afternoon of the house's waking life steamed gently to itself as though no time had passed at all. Portraits opened their eyes as he passed and looked at him, Peveril's, generations of them, dark-haired and green-eyed and watchful, the family resemblance running down the centuries to the boy in the hall, and one by one, without a word, as he passed beneath them, they inclined their heads. He came to the great hall of the house, where a single high-backed chair stood on a low dais beneath a window that looked out on the gray sea, and over the chair, carved into the stone of the wall, was the mark, the triangle, the circle, the line, and beneath it, in letters worn nearly smooth, 3 words in a language Harry could not read and somehow understood. The last shall keep. He stood in the hall of his fathers, with the sea gray beyond the glass and 100 dead Peverils watching from the walls and the deep-water stone warm on his hand, and the thing that had eased open 1 inch in the bank and another inch in the breakfast room eased open the rest of the way, all at once, and he let it, because there was no one here to take it from him. He was not a nuisance. He was not a burden. He was not the crack in the plaster of someone else's house, painted over every day, the thing there had never been a plan for. He was the last of an ancient line, standing in a hall that had waited 100 years for him to come home, and the house knew him, and the dead knew him, and the sea knew him, and not one of them had ever once decided he was worth nothing, because they had been waiting, all of them, all along, for exactly him. Mine, he thought, the way he had thought it in the bank. And then, for the first time since he was very small, in the great hall of Peveril Manor, with no one watching but the dead, who would never tell Harry Potter, let himself cry. Once, for about a minute. For the boy in the cupboard, who had been right all along to believe the books and had simply been waiting like the house for the proof. Then he wiped his face and sat down in the high-backed chair that was his and looked out at the gray sea and began to plan. Far to the south, in an office in the Ministry of Magic that never made the papers, Corvus Yaxley sat at his desk on a Monday morning and opened his post. The first letter was a reversion filing. He had been processing reversion filings for 11 years, perhaps 2 a year, dusty claims from minor families reclaiming some long-dead cousin's holdings, and he processed them the way a man swats flies, with half his attention. He nearly set this one aside unread, then he saw the seal. Not the ministry's, not a private family's, the crowned key of Gringotts witnessing the claim, and beneath it, in a solicitor's precise hand, copied as a courtesy to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the name of the reclaiming house. Peverell. Yaxley sat very still. He read the filing again. He read the 3 filings beneath it, all sealed, all witnessed, all copied to the DMLE, all perfect, all reverting dormant estates, his dormant estates, the quiet stream he had bled for 11 years, to a house that had been extinct for 100 years and a day and was, the filings calmly asserted, extinct no longer. He understood in the space of 1 cold minute exactly what it meant, because he had spent 11 years being the only person who knew exactly what the dormant estates were worth, and now he was the second person, and the first was someone who had a goblin bank witnessing his claims and a solicitor copying the law to the law. Corvus Yaxley reached for a fresh sheet of parchment and a quill, and began, with a hand that was not quite steady, to write a letter to a man named Lucius Malfoy. And far above them both, in a circular office at the top of a tower at Hogwarts, a delicate silver instrument that had stood silent on a spindle-legged table for 8 years, humming so faintly that the old man at the desk had long since stopped hearing it, gave a single, sharp, deliberate chime and began to spin. Albus Dumbledore looked up from his letters. He crossed the room to the spindle-legged table, where the silver instrument turned, and he watched it, and his face, which had worn the same gentle weather for so long that the staff believed it incapable of anything else, went very slowly still. The instrument was keyed to the wards he had placed at Privet Drive 8 years before, the blood wards, the watching charms, the quiet net of protections and observations he had woven around the boy, and never once spoken of to anyone. It had hummed unbroken for 8 years. It was not humming now. It was spinning, which it did for one reason only. The boy was no longer at Privet Drive. The boy had not been at Privet Drive, the instrument now told him in its turning, for some weeks, and the wards had not been broken. That would have rung an alarm Albus could not have slept through. They had been allowed to lapse gently from the inside, by someone with the standing to dismiss them, which should not have been possible, because the only person with that standing was a child who did not know he had it. Albus Dumbledore stood in his tower with his letters forgotten in his hand and watched the silver instrument spin, and for the first time in a very long time, the most powerful wizard in Britain felt the particular cold that a man feels when he discovers that a game he believed he was playing alone has for some time now had another player at the board. "Harry," he said softly to the empty office, to the turning silver, to the boy he had hidden so carefully and lost so completely, "what have you done?" The instrument spun and did not answer, and far to the north a house that had waited 100 years burned its windows gold against the gray northern dark, and inside it, in a high-backed chair that was his, the answer to the old man's question sat looking out at the sea and planned and was not afraid. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The establishment notices the request came on ministry parchment by Ministry Owl, addressed to the bank rather than to Harry, because the man who sent it did not know where Harry was, only that the bank would. Ironclaw brought it to number 12 at breakfast and laid it beside the toast without comment, which was itself a comment, because Ironclaw laid nothing down without reason. Harry read it twice. "The Chief Warlock requests the honor of meeting Lord Peverell to discuss the welfare of the minor child in his care," he said. "That's clever. He's pretending he doesn't know they're the same person. He's giving me a way to meet him without admitting I'm a child, so I'll feel safe, so I'll come." He set it down, and he's calling it welfare, not custody. Welfare, so if I refuse, I'm the one refusing to discuss a child's welfare. "He is the most skilled man in Britain at making his moves look like your idea," said Ironclaw. "He has been doing it for 90 years. Do not meet him on his ground." "I won't," Harry was already thinking. "He'll want Hogwarts or his tower somewhere the castle does what he tells it, or the ministry where he's chief warlock and the room is built to make him tall. We meet here. No, not here. I don't want him knowing where I sleep." He looked up. "We meet at the bank, in your chamber. The one with the ledgers and the door with teeth. On goblin ground, under goblin law, where the most powerful wizard in Britain is a guest who can be asked to leave." Ironclaw's mouth moved. "The director will enjoy hosting him. We have not had a chief warlock cross our threshold as a supplicant in 300 years. He picked up the parchment. "I will reply. Lord Peverell, when you sit across from that man, remember the one thing about him that everyone forgets because he works very hard to make them forget it. He is not lying to you. He never lies. He is far too clever to lie. He arranges the truth so that you draw the false conclusion yourself, and then it is your conclusion and you defend it for him. Listen for the truths. Count what he leaves out. The shape of the silence will tell you everything the words are hiding." Harry held on to that. "One more thing," he said as Ironclaw turned to go. "Before I meet him, I want to know exactly what's in my father's will. You said I wasn't ready. I'm ready now. I'm not walking into a room with the man who sealed it without knowing what he sealed." Ironclaw stopped. He looked at Harry for a long moment, the dry assessment running behind his dark eyes, and then he inclined his head. "You are right," he said. "The general does not go to a parley ignorant of the treaty in dispute. I will bring it tomorrow, and I will read it to you, every line, and I warn you now, Lord Peverell, it will not make you angrier. Anger you have already spent, it will make you certain. And certainty in a room with Albus Dumbledore is the only armor that holds." The will did not make him angrier. Ironclaw had been right about that, as Ironclaw was right about most things. He named Sirius Black as godfather and first guardian, a name Harry had never heard, attached to a man who, Ironclaw explained with the flat care of a goblin delivering bad news, was at that moment in the wizarding prison of Azkaban, convicted without trial of the murders that had orphaned Harry in the first place. "Convicted without trial," Harry repeated, and Ironclaw said, "without trial." By the same emergency powers, exercised in the same week, by men who found a trial inconvenient, and Harry kept it, because it had the shape of a thing he would need later. It named Alice and Frank Longbottom as second guardians, also gone, Ironclaw said in a way that was worse than gone, and did not elaborate, and Harry did not ask, because there was a grief in the goblin's flat voice that even Harry would not disturb. It named the Tonks family, the Bones family. A list of friends, godparents, safe houses, a whole net of people who had loved James and Lily Potter and would have raised their son. And it named, in a separate clause in James Potter's own slanting hand, witnessed and sealed, the people the boy was on no account to be left with. Petunia Dursley and her husband headed the list. Beside their names in the margin, James had written a note, a joke, almost the kind of joke a young confident man makes when he cannot imagine the world will ever take him at his word. "Not Petunia. She'll starve the magic out of him to spite Lily. I'm only half joking." J.P. Harry read the note 3 times, then he set the will down and looked at his hands and was quiet for a while, and Ironclaw let him be quiet, because a goblin understands the value of an account left to settle. He knew, Harry said at last. My dad knew exactly what she'd do. He wrote it down, he warned everyone. And the one man with the power to make sure it never happened read this. He read this exact page, this exact note, and then he sealed it and sent me there anyway. His voice did not rise. It went, if anything, quieter and colder and very clear. I used to think maybe Dumbledore didn't know, that maybe he made a mistake, put me somewhere bad by accident. I wanted that to be true a little. It would have been easier. He looked up. It's not true. He read the warning. He chose. He chose, Ironclaw agreed. Then I'll meet him knowing he chose, said Harry. Good, thank you for reading it to me. And this time the thank you was not a shield. It was the real thing given once to the one person who had earned it, and Ironclaw received it the way he received everything, with a precise inclination of the head and not one wasted word. Albus Dumbledore came to Gringotts on a Thursday, and he came alone, and he came on foot up the white steps like any other customer, which Harry, watching from a high window with Ironclaw, recognized at once as a move. He's making himself small, Harry said. No entourage, no grand entrance. He wants me to see a tired old man climbing the steps, so I'll feel safe, so I'll feel a little sorry for him. He started before he's even in the room. Yes, said Ironclaw. And it will keep working even after you have named it, because that is the nature of the man. Knowing the trap does not free you from it, only watching it spring again and again until you have seen every shape it takes. He turned from the window. Come, let him climb, let him wait a little. Not too long he will read insolence and adjust, just long enough that the room is yours before he enters it. So when Albus Dumbledore was shown at last into the Chamber of Ledgers, Harry was already seated at the head of the long table, in the high-backed chair, with Ironclaw at his right hand and Tobias Hale at his left, and the river of names, coiled now, and golden along much of its length where the reclaimed houses glowed, laid out across the table between them like a thing on display. The cold white light hung overhead. The door with teeth closed behind the old man with a click that was, very slightly, a threat. And Albus Dumbledore stopped just inside the door and looked at the 8-year-old boy sitting where a lord sits, and for one unguarded instant, the only one Harry would catch all afternoon, and he caught it because he had spent his life watching for exactly that instant in the faces of people who held power over him. Something crossed the old man's face that was not gentle, and was not grandfatherly, and was very, very old. It was grief. And under the grief, fast and gone almost before it arrived, was fear. Then the gentle wither came back over his face like cloud over the sun, and his eyes twinkled, and he smiled, and he said in a voice like warm honey, Harry, my dear boy, how you've grown. Lord Peveril, said Harry, or Lord Potter if you prefer the house you knew, but not Harry. You haven't earned Harry. Sit down, Chief Warlock. You asked to discuss a child's welfare. Let's. It was the most dangerous conversation of Harry's life, and he knew it going in, and it was still worse than he expected, because Dumbledore was better than Ironclaw had warned, and Ironclaw had not undersold him. The old man sat. He folded his hands. He did not argue, did not bluster, did not once raise his voice or assert his authority, and that was the danger of him. He gave Harry nothing to push against, only an endless soft yielding that drew you forward off your balance. You have every right to your anger, Dumbledore said. I will not insult you by pretending the years at Privet Drive were kind. I knew they would not be comfortable. I made a hard choice, the hardest of my life, and I made it to keep you alive. There is a magic in your mother's sacrifice, Harry, a protection that lives in your aunt's blood, and so long as you could call her home, no follower of the wizard who killed your parents could touch you. I sent you to a hard house because a hard house behind that protection was safer than a soft house without it. I have watched over you every day of those 8 years. I never stopped. It was true. Harry could hear that it was true, the blood protection, the watching, all of it true, and he understood, exactly as Ironclaw had told him, that the truth was the trap. Because every true thing the old man said was arranged to lead to a false conclusion. I did it for love, therefore you should forgive me, therefore you should let me back in. So Harry did what Ironclaw had taught him. He listened for the truths, and he counted what was left out. The blood protection is real, Harry said. I believe you. Here's what you're leaving out. He laid one finger on the table. 1. My parents will name 6 other families I could have gone to. The Tonkses, the Boneses. People who loved them. The protection lives in my mother's blood, Petunia's blood, but Petunia could have visited. Could have had me to stay for a fortnight a year to renew it, the way these wards usually work, and I could have grown up somewhere I was wanted the other 50 weeks. You didn't have to choose between safe and loved. You chose it anyway, and you're telling it to me now as if it were the only door in the house, when you read the will and you know there were 6. Dumbledore's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did, and Harry pressed on, because Ironclaw had taught him that you do not give a master of conversation room to breathe. 2. A second finger. You say you watched over me every day, with what? A silver instrument in your tower, keyed to the wards, that told you I was alive and where I was and nothing else. It didn't tell you Vernon kept me in a cupboard. It didn't tell you I was fed scraps. It couldn't, because you didn't build it to. You built it to tell you I was contained, not safe, contained. There's a difference, and you of all people know it, because you're the man who taught the whole country the difference between the two. He let that land. 3. You've been paying my aunt and uncle to keep me. A stipend, out of the Hogwarts endowment, which, it turns out, I partone. So for 8 years you paid my jailers out of my own pocket and called it my welfare, and you're sitting here now, still calling it my welfare." Harry leaned forward and his green eyes were very steady. "I'm not angry, Chief Warlock. I spent the anger. I'm telling you what I know line by line so that you understand there's no version of for your own good you can build that I haven't already taken apart. You're very good. You're the best I'll ever meet. And it doesn't matter because I did my reading and the reading doesn't lie and you do, not with words. I'll grant you that you never lie with words but with everything you leave out. And I count what's left out. I've counted my whole life. It's the only thing the cupboard was good for." The chamber was silent. Ironclaw sat unmoving. Hale had stopped breathing. Albus Dumbledore looked at the boy across the table, the boy he had hidden and lost and come here to recover, and for a long moment he did not speak, and when he did, the warm honey had gone out of his voice, and what was left was older and barer, and Harry thought, more honest than anything that had come before it. "You are," Dumbledore said quietly, "very like your mother. She also kept accounts. She also could not be talked out of a thing she had seen with her own eyes." He was quiet a moment. "I will tell you a truth I had not meant to tell you today, because you have earned it and because I find, to my own surprise, that I cannot do otherwise sitting where I am sitting. I did not only hide you to keep you safe from Voldemort's followers." Hale flinched at the name. Harry did not, because he did not yet know enough to be afraid of it. "I hid you because there is a thing coming, Harry, a thing I have spent my life preparing for, a war that is not over, only sleeping, and in that war you have a part to play that no one else can play, and I needed you to grow into it a certain way. Shaped a certain way, ready to be guided when the time came. I told myself the hardness would make you strong. I told myself a great many things." He met Harry's eyes, and the grief was back, undisguised now. "What I did not allow for what I see now, sitting here too late, is that you would grow strong in a direction I did not aim you, that you would become not the boy I needed, but a lord I cannot guide at all. That is my failure, and it is entire, and I am old enough to know it when I see it." It was, Harry understood, the most dangerous thing the old man had said yet, because it was the truest, and the truest thing was always the trap, and this trap was baited with the one thing Harry had wanted his whole life and never had, an adult who saw him clearly and admitted he had been wrong. Harry felt the pull of it, he respected the pull of it, and he did not move toward it 1 inch. "That's the best one yet," Harry said, almost gently. "An apology. A real one, I think, or real enough that you've half convinced yourself, and a secret to make me feel chosen, and a war I have a part in so that I'll need you after all." He shook his head slowly. "I believe there's a war. I believe I have a part in it. I'll find out what it is in my own time from sources I can check. I won't take it from you because everything you give me comes with a string, and the string runs back to your hand and you can't help it. It's just how you're built, the same way I count what's left out. So here's where we are, Chief Warlock." He sat back. "You're not my guardian. The bank is conservator of my estate lawfully by contract you can't break. I'm emancipated for estate matters the moment I take my seats, by statute older than your emergency powers. You have no door back in. None. Check them all." He paused. "But I'm not your enemy yet either. You did keep me alive. The blood protection was real. I'll grant you that much, and I'll grant you a truce on one condition, and you'll want to hear it before you decide whether to keep being clever at me." "Name it," said Dumbledore. "Stop the stipend today, and clear my parents' other heir, the godfather, Sirius Black, convicted without a trial in the same week you sealed the will by the same powers. I don't know if he's innocent. But I know he never got a trial, and a man who sealed one document that week and convicted another without process in the same week doesn't get to tell me which of his shortcuts were justice and which were convenience." Harry's voice was flat and cold and absolutely level. "Get him a trial, a real one. That's the price of the truce. You're Chief Warlock. You can do it with a word. If you do it, we're at peace, you and I, for now. If you don't," he gestured at the golden river of names, the 20 seats coiled and waiting, "then the most powerful voting bloc in the Wisengamot is going to spend its first session asking the chamber some very public questions about what else got sealed and convicted the week the Potters died. Your choice. You're good at hard choices. You told me so yourself." Dumbledore left an hour later, and he did not get a single thing he had come for, and he knew it, and Harry knew that he knew it, and that was the most dangerous part of all, because a defeated master of the game does not stop playing. He goes home and changes the game. "You frightened him," Ironclaw said when the door with teeth had closed. "I have watched that man for 60 years across a counter. I have never seen him leave a room without the thing he came for. You did not give him the thing. You gave him a price instead, and the price was just, which is worse, because now he cannot move against you without moving against justice, and he has spent 90 years being the man who stands for justice. You have nailed his own reputation to your demands. It was beautifully done." "It won't hold," Harry said. He was watching the white steps through the high window where the old man walked slowly down into the alley, stooped, tired, small. "He'll do the things I asked, the stipend, maybe even the trial, because not doing them costs him more than doing them. But he won't give up the regency. He can't. He thinks there's a war coming and he needs to own me for it. He'll go home and find another door, one I haven't checked yet. There is no door you have not checked. There's always a door I haven't checked," Harry said. "That's the only rule that's never failed me. The day I think I've checked all the doors is the day someone walks through one." He turned from the window. Get me everything on the emergency powers of the chief warlock, every clause, every time they've been used in 200 years. He used them to seal the will and convict Black. He'll use them again, some old instrument, some custody power dressed up as protection. I want to know it exists before he files it, not after. Down in the ministry, the other front opened, and it opened louder, because the men on it were not as patient as Dumbledore and had far more to lose. Corvus Yaxley's letter had reached Lucius Malfoy, and Lucius Malfoy had done what Lucius Malfoy always did, which was to find a respectable instrument for a disreputable purpose. The instrument's name was Cornelius Fudge. Fudge was senior undersecretary to the minister, an ambitious, soft, vain man who wanted very much to be minister himself, and could be moved in any direction by anyone who flattered his sense of his own importance and slipped a little gold into the flattery to make it stick. Malfoy had been flattering and slipping gold into Cornelius Fudge for years, against exactly this kind of day. The play was simple, and Hale brought word of it within the week, because Hale's habit of copying everything to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement cut both ways. The DMLE talked, and a sympathetic clerk talked to Hale, and the shape of the thing came back to number 12 in pieces. They mean to question the test, Hale said grimly at the long table. Yaxley cannot refuse a valid reversion, but he can argue the reversions are not valid by arguing the heir is not proven. He is preparing a motion through Fudge to require that your claims be verified by a ministry inquiry before any further estates are released. A ministry inquiry he would, of course, sit on. It would freeze every pending reversion for months, years, while he buries the books that show what he stole and prepares his exit. He can't question the goblin test, Harry said. The heritage parchment can't lie. Ironclaw said so. The heritage parchment cannot lie, Hale agreed. But it is a goblin instrument, and there is 200 years of ministry policy treating goblin instruments as unreliable for wizarding legal purposes, policy written precisely so that wizards never have to accept a goblin's word against a wizard's. Fudge will not argue that the parchment lied. He will argue that the parchment is not admissible, that a claim of this magnitude must be proven by ministry methods before a ministry body. It is not a strong argument on the merits. It does not have to be, it only has to be strong enough to justify a freeze, and a freeze is all Yaxley needs. Harry sat with that and turned it and found the flaw in it the way he found the flaw in everything, by asking who benefited and what they had left out. Who decides whether the motion passes, he asked. The Wisengamot, said Hale. It's a procedural motion. It would be put to the chamber at the next full session. The next full session. Harry's eyes came up, and the cold, clear, patient thing was in them, and under it, for the first time, was something that was very nearly a smile. The Wisengamot, the chamber where I'm about to control 20 seats the day my reversions process. They want to freeze my reversions with a vote in a room where I'm about to hold more votes than anyone alive. He looked at Hale. They don't know that yet, do they? Fudge, Yaxley. They don't know how many seats I have because the reversions haven't all processed, so the clerks haven't tallied the block, so nobody's added it up. They think they're moving against a mysterious heir with a handful of claims. They don't know they're about to walk a freeze motion into a chamber the heir already owns. No, said Hale slowly. I don't believe they do. Then we let them file it, Harry said. We don't fight it, we don't warn them. We let Fudge stand up at the next session and move to freeze my reversions in front of the whole chamber on the record, and then we let the clerks read the tally of who holds what, and the chamber finds out in the same minute that the procedural motion to investigate the unknown heir is being voted on by the unknown heir who holds the balance of the room. He sat back. Let them spend their ambush. I'd rather they spent it where everyone's watching. It's much harder to pretend it didn't happen that way. Hale looked at the 8-year-old at the head of the table for a long moment, and then he began, despite himself, to laugh, the helpless, delighted laugh of a man who has spent 26 years in a profession of cautious incremental moves and has just watched someone play a large one perfectly. Mr. Potter, he said, I am going to need you to promise me something. When you're grown and you hold this whole country in your hand the way you are plainly going to, promise me you'll remember that I was on your side at the start, and that I found it the most fun I have ever had at work. I'll remember, Harry said, and meant it, and said it beside the deep water where the friends went, of whom there were now, he counted, exactly 3, a curse breaker, a goblin, and a solicitor who laughed at the right things. While Harry counted his friends, his enemies counted theirs, in a drawing room far grander and far colder than anything at number 12. Lucius Malfoy did not pace. Pacing was for men who had lost control of a situation, and Lucius Malfoy was determined, against mounting evidence, to believe he had not. He stood at the window of the manor that bore his name, a glass of something old and expensive untouched in his hand, and listened to Corvus Yaxley not pace badly. You don't understand, Yaxley was saying, and the fear in his voice was a thing Malfoy found distasteful, the way he found all weakness distasteful, even when it was useful. The audit goes back 11 years. 11. If that boy's goblins have the full count, and they have the full count, Lucius, the goblins always have the full count, then it isn't a fine, it isn't a censure, it's the dark wing. I am not going to the dark wing of Azkaban because an 8-year-old learned to read. You are not going anywhere, Malfoy said, if you stop sweating on my carpet and think. He turned from the window. The boy's strength is that everything he does is lawful, perfectly, irritatingly lawful. He has not broken a single rule, he has merely read all of them. Which means he cannot be fought with rule-breaking, because the moment we step outside the law, his goblins and his solicitor and that dreadful Bones woman descend on us with the law, and we lose, publicly, the way we lost the prophet. A flicker of distaste crossed his pale face at the memory of his own weapon turning in his own hand. No, he must be fought with the law itself. We do not break a rule, we make one. Make one, Yaxley repeated. A child of 8 holds a third of the Wisengamot. Put aside for a moment that it is this particular child. Consider the principle. Malfoy's voice took on the silk it used when it was being most dangerous. Is it wise? Is it safe? Should any child, however gifted, control the government of magical Britain? Ask it in those words to the right people in the right rooms, and half the chamber will agree with you before they remember whom they are agreeing about, because the principle is sound, Corvus. That is the beauty of it. We need not lie. We need only legislate, a simple amendment. No person below the age of majority may exercise the active powers of a lordship. Dry, reasonable, unobjectionable. And aimed like an arrow at precisely one head, Yaxley stopped, not pacing. It would suspend his seats. It would suspend his seats and hand their administration to a guardian appointed by the chief warlock, Malfoy said, who I have it on excellent authority would not refuse the office, because the chief warlock believes, in his infinite tiresome wisdom, that he alone knows what is best for the boy. So we in Dumbledore want the same thing for entirely different reasons, which is the only kind of alliance worth having, one where your partner cannot betray you without betraying himself. He sipped his drink at last. We table it quietly, buried in an administrative package no one reads, seconded by a backbencher no one watches, whipped softly by men who owe me, on a sleepy session when half the chamber is at their country houses. It passes on the nod the way 100 dull bills pass every year, and by the time the boy's clever solicitor reads it in the Gazette, it is law and his seats are frozen and his goblins have nothing to descend with because nothing has been broken. A rule has merely been made. He smiled thinly. Let him read all the laws he likes. We will simply write a new one while he is reading the old ones. It was, Yaxley had to admit, elegant. It was also, though neither man said it, because saying it would have admitted how badly the season had gone, an act of desperation dressed as strategy, the move of men who had been beaten in the open and had retreated, exactly as the boy's old enemy in the high tower had predicted they would, into the quiet places where they still believed themselves safe. And if it fails, Yaxley asked, if he reads it in time, if he counts the votes. Something crossed Lucius Malfoy's face then quickly and gone that Yaxley would remember later in a cell with a great deal of time to remember things. It was not strategy. It was the first cold flicker of a man beginning to consider doors that even Lucius Malfoy preferred to keep closed. Then Malfoy said, we will discuss what desperate men do when reasonable men have failed them. But not tonight, Corvus. Tonight we are reasonable men making a reasonable law. Go home. Stop sweating. And do not, under any circumstances, do anything clever on your own. The boy's whole strength is that we keep handing him our mistakes. Let us for once stop handing him mistakes. It was good advice. Corvus Yaxley, a man with 11 years of theft behind him and the dark wing in front of him, would not in the end take it, and the not taking of it would be the thing that ended them both. But that was still some weeks away, and on this night the two men parted believing themselves clever, which is the most dangerous thing two losing men can believe. He gathered the others in the days that followed, because Ironclaw had taught him that a block of seats is only power if it is organized, and 20 seats voted by a child no one had met was a target, not a force. He went with Hale to see the neutrals, the old houses that belonged to no faction, that had spent decades keeping their heads down between Dumbledore's wing and Malfoy's, voting their consciences when they could afford to and abstaining when they couldn't. Cyrus Greengrass received them in a cold, elegant drawing room, and listened to Harry for an hour without interrupting. A lean gray man with a daughter Harry's age somewhere in the house, and the careful stillness of someone who had survived a war by betting on no one. At the end of the hour he said only, you are 8 years old and you have just explained the structure of the Wisengamot to me more clearly than my own father managed in 30 years of sitting in it. I do not know yet whether you are a gift or a catastrophe, but I know which way the wind is about to blow, and I have spent my life learning to read wind. The House of Greengrass will not oppose you. Beyond that we shall see. It was, from Cyrus Greengrass, a declaration of love. He went to see Augusta Longbottom because her name had been in his father's will, in the list of people who would have raised him. Alice and Frank Longbottom, second guardians, gone in the way that was worse than gone, and the formidable old woman in the vulture-trimmed hat looked at James Potter's son for a long time before she spoke, and what she said was, your mother held my Alice's hand at the end. Did the goblins tell you that? No, they wouldn't have. It isn't in a ledger. Her chin came up. The House of Longbottom stands with the House of Potter. It should have stood with you 8 years ago. I did not know where you were. None of us did. He saw to that. There was no need to say who he was. Tell me what you need, child, and tell me how I can make certain it never happens to another orphan in this country, because I have a grandson and I have buried enough. And he went last to Tiberius Ogden, the honest old elder of the chamber, who poured Harry a glass of his own famous fire whiskey over Hale's objection, watered to a child's measure and clinked his glass against it, and said, I have sat in that chamber for 50 years watching them seal wills and skip trials and vote dead men's seats, and I have lost every fight I ever picked because I never had the numbers. You have the numbers, boy. God help us all, you have the numbers. I'm with you. Now finish the whiskey, it's rude not to. 3 allies. A neutral who would not oppose, a grief that had become a sword, and an old honest man with nothing left to lose. It was not many. But Harry had spent his whole life with none, and he counted them carefully and set them beside the deep water, and found that the cold, clear, patient place was, for the first time, not entirely cold. And in his tower, Albus Dumbledore made his choice. He did the things Harry had demanded, because not doing them cost more than doing them, exactly as Harry had predicted. He stopped the stipend with a single owl. He opened a quiet review of the case of Sirius Black, which would in time become a trial, and a trial that would in time free an innocent man, though that was a thread for a later day, and neither Harry nor the old man could see its end yet. And then, having paid the price of the truce, Albus Dumbledore broke it, not openly, never openly, but in the way the old man broke everything, by finding the door no one had checked. Drew from the deepest drawer of his desk a sheet of parchment so old the ministry's own archivists had forgotten it existed. An instrument of the Chief Warlock's emergency authority, last invoked 200 years before, that permitted the Chief Warlock, in time of threat to a minor of the realm, to place that minor under the protection of the crown, under the personal wardship in practice of the Chief Warlock himself, pending the chamber's confirmation. It was the Regency, dressed as protection. It was the door Harry had warned Ironclaw existed and had not yet found. And Albus Dumbledore signed it, with grief and with certainty in equal measure, because he believed in the war that was coming the way other men believed in God, and he had decided, sitting alone in his tower, that a lord he could not guide was a weapon his enemy might one day turn, and that it was better, kinder, even to take the boy in hand now, while the boy was still only 8. He filed it that night. By law it would be heard at the next full session of the Wisengamot, which was, as it happened, in 48 hours. And so the 2 ambushes were laid for the same chamber on the same afternoon, Fudge's freeze and Dumbledore's wardship, the ministry's greed and the old man's certainty, converging without quite knowing they converged on a boy who held more votes than either of them had counted, and the only person in all of magical Britain who understood that both traps were about to spring into the same room, at the same hour in front of the same 50 watching lords, was the boy himself. Ironclaw brought the news of the wardship filing to number 12 at midnight, his dark eyes grim, and found Harry awake, dressed, sitting at the long table with the law of the Chief Warlock's emergency powers open in front of him, the very clauses he had asked for days before, read and reread and annotated in an 8-year-old's careful hand. He filed it, Ironclaw said. The wardship, you were right, there was a door. I know, Harry said without looking up. I found it yesterday. Clause 11, the old protection of minors instrument, 200 years dormant. He turned the page toward the goblin, and there in the margin in his own hand was a note, written the day before the old man had even signed it. I found his door before he walked through it, and I found what's on the other side of it. He looked up, and he was not afraid, and he was not angry, and the cold, clear, patient thing in his eyes had become, at last, something with an edge. He thinks he's springing a trap on me in 48 hours. He doesn't know I've been standing in the room he's walking into since yesterday afternoon, waiting for him. Get Hale, get Greengrass and Longbottom and Ogden. We have 2 days. He turned back to the law. Let's go to the Wisengamot. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. Laws as weapons. They dressed him for it, because Ironclaw said the chamber would decide half its opinion before he opened his mouth, and a lord who looked like a borrowed boy would be treated like one. The robes were peveril black, with the deep-water sheen of the signet stone worked into the weave so that they seemed darker than black where the light moved, and over the breast, in thread that caught light when no light was on it, the mark, triangle, circle, line. They had been made for a man, and the bank seamstresses had taken them in overnight to fit a child of 8, and when Harry looked at himself in the long glass at number 12 he saw, for the first time, not the boy from the cupboard, but the thing the boy from the cupboard had been all along underneath, waiting like the house. You will not speak first, Ironclaw said, settling the robes at his shoulders. You will let them spring both traps. You will let Fudge move his freeze, and you will let the old man move his wardship, and you will sit, and you will let the chamber believe it is watching the disposal of a problem. And then, when both motions are on the floor and cannot be withdrawn, you will rise, and you will be what they did not count on. Power revealed is worth twice power announced. Let them announce, you reveal, and if it goes wrong, then it goes wrong in front of 50 witnesses, which is the safest place in Britain for it to go wrong, said the goblin, because the one thing none of them can survive is being seen to cheat a child in open court. You have arranged for everything they do to be done where it cannot be unseen. That is the whole of the strategy, Lord Peveril. You have not built a wall, you have built a stage and invited your enemies onto it and lit it very brightly. He stepped back. Now, the director will attend, which has not happened in 3 centuries, and Hale will hold your papers, and your 3 lords will sit where the chamber can see them stand with you when the time comes. Remember to breathe. Remember that you have already read every law they will quote. Remember that you are not a boy pretending to be a lord. You are a lord who happens, inconveniently for them, to be 8. The Wizengamot met in a chamber deep beneath the ministry, a great circular pit of benches rising tier on tier around a sunken floor, lit by torches that burned with a cold blue flame and gave the whole room the look of a court at the bottom of the sea. The lords sat in plum-colored robes, 50 of them on a full day, and this was a full day, because word had gone round, as word always went round, that something was to be done about the mysterious heir, and the lords of magical Britain never missed the disposal of a problem. Harry entered last by the petitioner's door, and the chamber did not at first understand what it was seeing, because what it was seeing was a child in Peveril black walking unhurried across the sunken floor to the petitioner's chair, with a goblin director on one side of him and a stooped solicitor on the other, and the not understanding bought him 3 full seconds of silence before the muttering began. He sat, he folded his hands. He looked up at the tiers of plum-robed lords looking down at him, and he found among them the faces he had come to know, Greengrass, grey and still, Augusta Longbottom, chin up, vulture hat quivering, old Ogden with a glint in his eye, and he found the faces he had come to take apart, Lucius Malfoy, silver-haired and elegant, leaning to murmur to a sweating Cornelius Fudge. And high in the center of the chamber, in the great carved seat of the chief warlock, with the silver weighing scales of his office before him, Albus Dumbledore, who looked down at the boy he had filed to capture, and did not twinkle, because there was no audience worth twinkling for in the look the boy gave back. "This session of the Wizengamot is called to order," intoned the chief warlock, and his voice filled the sunken room without seeming to rise. "We have before us several matters touching the estates lately reclaimed under the name of Peveril, and the welfare of the minor connected to them. The chair recognizes the senior undersecretary, so Fudge went first. Of course he did. Malfoy would want the greedy move made before the noble one, the freeze laid down before the wardship, so that the chamber would be primed to see the heir as a problem before it was asked to solve him. Cornelius Fudge rose, mopping his brow, and made his motion, and made it badly, because Cornelius Fudge had never in his life understood a thing he was saying, and understood this one less than most. He spoke of the gravity of the reclamations. He spoke of estates of national significance passing on the strength of a single goblin instrument of uncertain standing. He spoke, and here Malfoy's hand was visible in the words, a velvet glove over Yaxley's iron, of the long-settled policy of this ministry that goblin testimony, however well-intentioned, cannot alone determine the disposition of wizarding property, and he moved, therefore, that all pending reversions under the name of Peveril be frozen, and the claimant's heirship referred to a ministry inquiry, before one further estate changed hands. The motion was seconded by a lord in Malfoy's pocket, and it lay on the floor of the chamber and could not now be withdrawn. The first trap was sprung. "The chair thanks the undersecretary," said Dumbledore. "Before the chamber debates the motion, there is a connected matter that bears upon it, in which I am bound by my office to lay before you." He rose, and the chamber rose with its attention, because when the chief warlock laid a matter before them himself, it was always grave. The heir at the center of these claims is, as some of you may have surmised, a child. He is, in fact, the orphan son of James and Lily Potter, Harry Potter, whom this chamber once honored, and whom I have, these 8 years, kept safe in concealment for reasons of his protection. A stir ran the tiers. He is 8 years old. He has come into possession, how we will examine, of property and seats of a magnitude no child has ever held, advised by a foreign bank whose interests are not our own. I do not question the boy's blood. I question whether it is wise or safe or kind to leave a child of 8 at the center of forces that grown men have died reaching for. He let the warmth come into his voice, the grandfather, the regret. I have therefore exercised with a heavy heart an ancient protection of this office. I have placed Harry Potter under the wardship of the crown, pending this chamber's confirmation, that he might be sheltered and guided to his majority by hands accountable to you all, rather than to a goblin ledger. I ask the chamber to confirm it, not for my sake, for his. It was beautifully done. Harry could admire it even as it was aimed at him. The freeze had made him a problem, the wardship offered the solution, and the solution wore the face of a tired old man doing a kind thing he plainly took no pleasure in. Half the chamber was nodding before Dumbledore sat down. The trap was not a trap in the chamber's eyes, it was a rescue. The second trap was sprung, and both of them lay on the floor of the Wizengamot, side by side in front of 50 witnesses, where they could not be withdrawn and could not be unseen. "Does any lord wish to speak to the motions?" asked the chief warlock. Harry rose. He did not hurry. Ironclaw had drilled him on that above all things. The room belongs to the one who is least afraid of silence. He stood in his peveril black in the center of the sunken floor with 50 lords looking down, and he let them look, and he let the silence stretch until it was his and not theirs, and then he spoke, and his clear young voice carried to the highest tier without seeming to try, because the chamber had been built to carry the voice of whoever stood where he was standing, and no one had told it the speaker would be 8. "My name is Harry James Potter," he said. "I am lord of the ancient and noble house of Potter, and lord of the most ancient house of Peveril, and I would like to thank the senior undersecretary and the chief warlock for their concern about my welfare." He paused. "It's a new experience for me. I'd like to talk about it." A ripple went through the chamber's surprise, a few startled laughs quickly stifled. Fudge's mouth opened and closed. High above, Dumbledore's face did not move at all. "The undersecretary says my reversions rest on a single goblin instrument of uncertain standing," Harry went on. "He's mistaken, and I'd like to correct it before the chamber votes on a mistake. The heritage parchment is not of uncertain standing. It is the oldest instrument of inheritance in Britain, older than this ministry, older than this chamber. But I understand the undersecretary's worry. Goblin word against wizard word, there's 200 years of policy on it, and I've read all 200 years, and I agree with him that no claim of this size should rest on one instrument alone." He turned, slowly, taking in the tears. "So it doesn't. Every reversion I have filed rests on 3 independent proofs, and I have brought all 3, because I assumed someone would raise exactly this objection, and I would rather answer it once here than 100 times in an inquiry designed to never finish." Hale rose at his side and at a glance from Harry laid 3 documents on the clerk's table. "1," said Harry, "the heritage parchment witnessed by Gringotts. 2, for those who distrust goblin instruments, the Peveril signet ring, which by the chamber's own ancient law cannot be worn by any hand not of the blood, and which I am wearing, and which any lord present is welcome to attempt to remove, with my blessing and my warning." He raised his right hand. The Deepwater stone caught the blue torchlight and held it. No one moved to try. They knew what the rings of the old houses did to thieves. 3, for those who distrust both goblins and magic and trust only paper, the College of Heralds' own genealogical registry, the ministry's own record, which I had Mr. Hale subpoena last week, and which independently traces the Potter line to Peveril and Peveril to its dormant junior houses, exactly as the parchment does in the ministry's own ink in the ministry's own hand. He let that land. 3 proofs, goblin, magical, and the ministry's own. "The undersecretary's motion asks you to freeze my estates pending an inquiry into whether I am who I say I am. I have just proven who I am 3 ways, one of them yours. There is nothing left for an inquiry to inquire into, unless the purpose of the inquiry was never to establish the truth, but only to delay it. And I think the chamber should ask itself, before it votes, why a man would want my estates frozen so very badly that he'd move to freeze them before he'd even checked the ministry's own registry." He looked for the first time directly at Cornelius Fudge. "I checked it. It took an afternoon. Why didn't you?" The silence in the chamber changed. It is one thing to watch a problem be disposed of. It is another to watch the problem turn around and ask, mildly, why the man disposing of it hadn't done his homework. "The motion to freeze," Harry said, "rests on a doubt I have just removed. I'd ask the chamber to vote it down, and I'd ask the chamber to remember who brought it, and how fast and how unprepared. But that's the small matter. The chief warlock raised the large one, and I'd like to do him the honor of answering it properly, because he raised it properly, and he is owed that much." He turned to face the great carved seat and the old man in it and the silver scales of the chief warlock's office. "The chief warlock has placed me under the wardship of the crown," Harry said, "out of kindness, to shelter a child of 8 from forces grown men have died reaching for. I want to say first that I believe him." A murmur. This was not what the chamber had expected. "I think he does believe it's kind. I think he spent 8 years believing the hard things he chose for me were kind. That's what makes him dangerous, and it's also what makes this hard, because I'm not standing here to call him a villain. I'm standing here to call him wrong in law, which is a smaller word and a sharper one." He raised one hand and ticked the points off, the way he had ticked them off across the long table in the bank, except that now 50 lords were watching him do it. "The wardship rests on Clause 11 of the Chief Warlock's emergency authority, the protection of minors instrument, last invoked 200 years ago. I've read it, it's a real power, it's lawfully his, and it does not apply to me for 3 reasons, and I'll give them to you in order." He had them now, he could feel it, the particular quality of a room that has stopped deciding and started listening. 1. Clause 11 empowers the chief warlock to take a minor into crown protection. But the same body of law that grants Clause 11 also defines who is a minor for the purposes of property and standing, and it carves out an exception, written into the founding statutes of this very chamber, that a seated lord of an ancient house is emancipated for all matters touching his estate from the moment he claims his lordship, regardless of age. The reason is practical. The old houses could not afford to have their seats and lands frozen for a decade every time a lord died young and left a child. So they wrote the exception. I did not invent it. Your ancestors did to protect themselves. I have claimed 2 lordships. I am, by the Chamber's own founding law, emancipated for estate matters. And a wardship that purports to administer my estate is a wardship over an estate the law has already placed in my own hands. Clause 11 cannot reach it. The Chamber wrote that wall 1,000 years ago. I'm merely the first orphan in a long time who read the blueprints. Lucius Malfoy had gone very still. Augusta Longbottom's chin was rising, too. Harry's voice did not change, but the Chamber leaned toward it. Even if I were not emancipated, even if Clause 11 could reach me, it could not reach me through Peveril, because the House of Peveril holds a precedence that predates the office of Chief Warlock itself. When this chamber was founded, the most ancient houses were granted a standing the new offices could not override. It's why the founding seats are called the most ancient, and why they sit where they sit. The office of Chief Warlock is old. The House of Peveril is older. An instrument of the younger authority cannot bind the elder house. The Chief Warlock cannot ward a Peveril against the Peverils will any more than a tenant can evict his own landlord. The precedence is in the founding charter. I've brought the founding charter. Hale laid it on the table. Page 1. The chamber was utterly silent now. Somewhere in the high tiers, an old lord began very quietly to laugh, and it was Tiberius Ogden, who had waited 50 years to watch someone do this. 3, Harry said, and this is the one I'd ask the Chief Warlock to listen to most closely, because the first 2 are law and this one is conscience, and he has more of the second than the men around him, and I'd like to appeal to it once in the open before I stop appealing to it. He looked up at the old man in the high seat. The wardship is offered to shelter me from forces that would exploit a child for his fortune. I agree that's a real danger. I've been living inside it for 8 years. So let me tell the Chamber who has been exploiting the orphan Harry Potter for his fortune these 8 years, while he ate scraps in a cupboard in Surrey, and then the Chamber can decide whose hands are the safe ones. He gave them Yaxley first, because Yaxley was the easy one, and Ironclaw had taught him to win the easy battle before the hard one. Corvus Yaxley, Harry said, Registrar of Dormant Houses, has administered the dormant Peveril estates, my estates, for 11 years. In that time he has skimmed them, not crudely, carefully. A percentage here, a false maintenance charge there, yields reported lower than they were, and the difference vanishing into accounts in 3 countries. I have the figures. Gringotts has kept the count for 11 years because the dormant accounts pass through the bank even when the ministry administers them, and the bank keeps count of everything, and the bank does not forget. He nodded, and the director of Gringotts, who had not spoken, who had sat through the entire session as still and grave as a carving, rose once and laid upon the clerk's table a ledger bound in red, and sat again, and the gesture was worth more than any speech, because the Wisengamot had not seen a director of Gringotts rise in its chamber in living memory, and every lord present understood that the bank did not lend its name to a lie. I have copied the audit to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Harry said, as I have copied every filing in this matter from the beginning as a courtesy. The head of that department is present. He turned and found her, a square, stern woman in the tiers, monocle glinting, who had been watching the whole session with the still attention of a hunting cat. Madam Bones, I'm not asking the Wisengamot to convict Corvus Yaxley. That's not its job, and I won't ask a body to do a thing outside its powers. That's the whole point of why I'm standing here. I'm asking the Chamber only to note that the man who would have administered my fortune under a ministry inquiry is a man who has been stealing it for 11 years. And I'm asking Madam Bones, on the record in front of 50 witnesses, whether the evidence I've copied to her department is sufficient to open an investigation. Amelia Bones rose. She was not a woman who enjoyed theater, and her voice was flat and hard and entirely without warmth, which made it the most trustworthy voice that had spoken all day. I have reviewed the materials Mr. Potter's solicitor copied to my department over the past 3 weeks, she said. I did not at the time know what I was reading. I do now. The answer to the question is yes. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement will be opening an investigation into Corvus Yaxley this afternoon, and I would ask that the registrar not leave the ministry until my orders have spoken to him. She looked briefly at the sweating, frozen figure of Cornelius Fudge. I would also be interested to learn who exactly asked the senior undersecretary to move a motion that would have placed the investigation of these estates in the hands of the man now under investigation. But that is a question for another day in a quieter room. Cornelius Fudge made a sound like a man who has stepped onto a stair that is not there. The freeze motion died on the floor without a vote. No one would second its continuation now. To vote for it was to vote to hand a thief his victim's fortune in the open on the record, and not even Malfoy's pocketed lords were fool enough for that. The first enemy had fallen, and Harry had not raised his voice once. Then he turned to Lucius Malfoy, and the temperature of the chamber dropped, because everyone could feel that the easy battle was over and the hard one had come. Lord Malfoy, Harry said, chair of the Hogwarts Board of Governors, a respected name. I have a debt to discuss with you, and I'd rather discuss it here in the open than send you a quiet letter, because I've learned that quiet letters are how the powerful settle things they'd be ashamed to settle out loud, and I'd like us to be past being ashamed." Malfoy rose, smooth as oil, recovering the elegance he had lost watching Yaxley burn. "I am not aware," he said, in a voice like cold silk, "of any debt between the House of Malfoy and a child I have never met." "You wouldn't be," Harry agreed pleasantly. "It's an old one, the winter of 1979. The House of Malfoy was badly short of gold at a delicate moment, for reasons I won't embarrass you with in front of your peers, though Madame Bones might find them interesting another day in a quieter room." A flicker of fear crossed Malfoy's pale face at his own phrase turned back on him. "You came to Gringotts, you borrowed a great deal, enough to save your house from ruin. You borrowed it from James Potter, my father, who found the idea of you being privately in his debt extremely funny, and who secured the loan against a portion of your estate, witnessed by the bank, recorded in the Green Ledger. And then he died 18 months later, and the debt passed into trust. Here, he touched the Deepwater ring, into my estate with everything else, and it was never repaid. You have walked the corridors of power for 8 years as one of the richest men in Britain, on a fortune that is, in significant part, a defaulted loan from a dead man's orphan." He paused. "I'd like it back now, with interest. A century of it would be excessive. It's only been 8 years, but 8 years of compound interest at the rate written in the contract you signed comes to a number Mr. Hale has calculated, and it is a large number, Lord Malfoy, and I am calling the loan." The chamber held its breath. This was no longer the disposal of a problem. This was an execution conducted by a child with paper. "There is no such loan," Malfoy said, but his voice had thinned. The director of Gringotts rose a second time. He did not speak. He laid upon the clerk's table a ledger bound in green, with a clasp shaped like a serpent eating its tail, and he opened it to a page bearing the signature of Lucius Malfoy and Lucius Malfoy's own hand, and he turned it so the nearest lords could see, and he sat down. And the bank's silence again was worth more than any oath, because the Wisengamot knew that the goblins did not forge, did not exaggerate, and did not ever forget a debt. "You may dispute the figure," Harry said, almost gently. "You may have your own people check Mr. Hale's arithmetic. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. But you cannot dispute the debt because the bank has just witnessed it, and you cannot dispute the collateral because you pledged it, and you cannot let it go to a forced sale of Malfoy land in open court, because that would be the end of you in this chamber, and we both know it." He let the trap close, one tooth at a time, in the daylight, where everyone could watch it. "So here is what I propose, Lord Malfoy, and I propose it publicly so that you can accept it without anyone being able to say later that you were robbed in the dark. You will repay the principal and the lawful interest on a schedule Mr. Hale and your people will agree, secured as it always was against your estate. You will surrender the dormant house proxies you have been voting without right, we both know which ones, back to the chamber today. And in exchange, I will not ask Madame Bones to look into the reasons you needed the gold in the winter of 1979. He smiled, and it was not a child's smile. "I'd call that generous. I'd call it the most generous offer you'll get from anyone you've wronged for the rest of your life. I'd take it if I were you. And I'd take it now out loud so the chamber hears you take it." Lucius Malfoy looked down at the boy in Peveril Black, and the boy looked back, and in the silence the whole chamber understood what it was watching. Not a child being sheltered from forces grown men had died reaching for, but a child who had taken those forces in his hand and was using them, deliberately, with terrible precision, on a man who had spent 30 years learning to be untouchable. "I will," said Lucius Malfoy through his teeth, "instruct my people to review the matter." "You'll do better than that," Harry said, "but it's a start and I'm patient. The chamber will note that Lord Malfoy has acknowledged the debt and the proxies. We can settle the schedule out of session." He turned away from Malfoy, dismissing him, which was the cruelest thing he could have done, and he knew it, and he turned back to the great carved seat at the center of the chamber, and to the old man in it, because there was one matter left, and it was the one that mattered. "That leaves the Chief Warlock's wardship," Harry said, "and the question he raised, which was a fair one and which I promised to answer fairly. Who are the safe hands for the orphan Harry Potter and his fortune?" The chamber was silent. The blue torches burned. Even Dumbledore now was simply listening, because there was nothing left to do but listen. "For 8 years, Harry said, I lived with my mother's sister and her husband in a cupboard under their stairs, on the scraps from their table, doing their chores, told every day that I was a burden no one had wanted. I'm not telling the chamber this for sympathy. I spent the sympathy a long time ago, the same place I spent the anger. Telling you because of one fact, and the fact is this. My aunt and uncle are not wealthy people, and they would never ever have kept a child who cost them money, and yet they kept me 8 years, complaining all the while about the expense while never actually going without, which means someone was paying them a stipend for my care. He let it hang. There is a record of it. The payments did not come from my trust vault that was left untouched, 8 years of it sitting full while I ate scraps. They came from a discretionary fund of the Hogwarts endowment." He paused, and for the only time in the whole session, he looked not at the chamber but only at the old man in the high seat, and he spoke to him alone, though 50 lords heard it. The Hogwarts endowment, which the chamber will be interested to learn and the chief warlock already knows is the founder's trust and is part-owned by the heir of Gryffindor, which the heritage parchment names as me. So for 8 years, someone with authority over that fund paid my jailers to keep me small, out of money that was, in part, my own. I'm not going to name the someone today. He didn't have to. The whole chamber had turned as one to look at the man who controlled the Hogwarts endowment, and the man controlled it from the great carved seat at the center of the room. I'm not going to name him because I made him a promise and he's keeping his half of it. The stipend stopped the day I asked, and a wrongly convicted man is getting his trial because I asked, and I keep my bargains even with people I'm fighting. But I'd ask the chamber to hold one thought while it votes on whether to place me and my fortune in the wardship of the crown. His voice was very level, very clear, very cold. The hands the wardship would place me in are the same hands that have been paying my jailers out of my own pocket for 8 years. The chamber can call that protection if it likes. I've read the law on it. I call it the longest-running theft from a minor in the history of this ministry, and the thief is asking you today with a heavy heart for the right to keep managing the victim's money until the victim turns 17. He turned, finally, to take in the whole chamber, all 50 tiers of plum-robed lords, who were no longer looking at a problem to be disposed of. I don't need the crown's protection, Harry said. I have 3 proofs of who I am, an emancipation written by your own ancestors, a precedence older than the office that's trying to ward me, a goblin bank that would go to war before it surrendered my estate, 3 honest lords who have agreed to stand with me, and a head of law enforcement who has just opened an investigation into one of the 2 men who tried to rob me in this room today. What I need from the Wisengamot is nothing at all except that it vote down the wardship, and let an emancipated lord take up his seats and govern his own house as your own 1,000-year-old law says he may. That's all. I've done the rest myself. I've been doing the rest myself my whole life. I'm just for the first time allowed to. He sat down, and the Wisengamot deep beneath the ministry in the blue light of the drowned court was silent for the space of 3 heartbeats. Then Augusta Longbottom rose, vulture hat trembling with fury and something fiercer than fury, and said, "The House of Longbottom moves that the wardship be rejected, and that the seats of the houses of Potter and Peveril and the reverted houses be confirmed and seated this day, in the hands of their lawful emancipated lord. I have buried enough of this country's orphans. I will not bury this one in a wardship while I have a vote to cast against it." "Seconded," said Tiberius Ogden before she had finished, and about time. "The House of Greengrass supports the motion," said Cyrus Greengrass, rising, gray and certain, and that was the wind shifting, and the chamber felt it shift, and the neutral houses began, one after another, to rise. The wardship was rejected by a margin that made the count a formality. The seats were confirmed. And when the clerks read out the tally of the houses now seated in the hands of Lord Harry James Potter Peveril, the reckoning that Fudge and Yaxley and Malfoy had never thought to make, because they had moved against a mystery and not a man, a sound went through the chamber, a long exhalation, as 50 lords understood in the same instant exactly what had walked into their drowned court that afternoon and exactly how badly they had misjudged it. 21 seats, voted as one. By a child of 8 who had just, in the space of a single session, broken a ministry thief, leashed the richest man in Britain and refused the chief warlock to his face, using nothing but the chamber's own law, read more carefully than the men who had written it had ever bothered to read it themselves. He was, in the most literal arithmetical sense, the most powerful single voice in the government of magical Britain, and he had not yet turned 9. Dumbledore caught him in the corridor afterward as the lords filed out muttering, with Ironclaw a pace behind and Hale gathering the papers and the director of Gringotts already gone, his work done in 2 risings and not one word. "That was masterful," the old man said quietly, and there was no warm honey in it now, only a tiredness that went all the way down. "Your father had the courage of it, your mother had the precision. I have never in a long life seen both in one person, let alone in one so young. You were right, Harry. In law and in conscience you were right and I was wrong, and I will live with having been wrong as I have learned to live with a great many things." "But you don't believe it," Harry said. "Not really. You think you were right and the law was wrong. You think there's a war coming and I should be yours for it, and that everything I did today just proves how dangerous I'll be if I'm not." He looked up at the old man and there was no triumph in his face, only the flat clear seeing that the cupboard had taught him. "I can see you thinking it, Chief Warlock. You lost the room. You didn't lose the certainty. And a man who loses the room but keeps the certainty doesn't stop. He goes home and finds another door." Albus Dumbledore looked at the boy for a long moment and did not deny it, which was, Harry thought, the most honest thing he had done all day. "Be careful, Harry," the old man said at last, and it was not a threat, and it was not entirely a kindness either. It was something graver than both. "You have made enemies today who do not lose in the open and forgive in private. They lose in the open and answer in the dark. You have leashed Lucius Malfoy in front of his peers, which he will never forgive, and you have ended Corvus Yaxley, who has nothing left to lose, which makes a man dangerous." And you have shown the whole of magical Britain that a child holds the balance of its government, which means that from this afternoon, every faction in this country will be calculating how to take that balance from you or use you to hold it. He turned to go, stooped, ancient, and at the last he looked back. I made my move and you broke it. They will make theirs, and theirs will not come as a motion in open court where you are strongest. It will come as a knife in a corridor where you are 8 years old and very far from your bank. Win that one too, and I will believe at last that the boy I hid has become something I cannot guide and need not fear. Lose it, the blue eyes were grave, and there will be no one left to ward you, because you have just spent the afternoon teaching the whole world that you do not need warding. He left. And Harry stood in the corridor beneath the ministry, 21 seats heavy on his shoulders, his enemies broken and bleeding and far more dangerous broken than whole, and understood that the old man, even in defeat, even retreating, had just told him the truth, the way he always did, the way that was always the trap, because the counterstroke was already coming. He could feel it the way he could feel a house wake, and it would not come where he was strong. Ironclaw, Harry said quietly, not turning. The chief warlock just warned me that they'll come at me in the dark, away from the bank where I'm only a child. He's right, he's always right, that's what makes him dangerous. He looked down at the Deepwater ring. So we don't let me be away from the bank, we don't let me be only a child. Whatever they're planning, it starts the moment we leave this building. Get me home, wake the wards. And get me everything on what a desperate man and a leashed man and a beaten old man do when they stop losing in the open and start answering in the dark. Because they're about to. And I intend to be standing in that room too, waiting before they even know they've walked into it. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The counterstroke, the first blow came, as Dumbledore had promised, where Harry was supposed to be weakest, in print, in the one weapon his enemies were certain they still held. It was Lucius Malfoy's move, and it was clever because it did not attack Harry at all. It attacked the goblins. The story ran on a Tuesday, and Harry knew it was coming on the Monday because the Daily Prophet was his, and a paper a man owns does not surprise him. The draft came to number 12 in a sealed folder, carried by an anxious sub-editor who had been told only that the proprietor wished to review certain sensitive copy before it ran, and Harry read it at the breakfast table with Hale and Ironclaw at his shoulders. Goblin Gold, wizard boy, who really controls the Potter fortune. It was well done. It did not lie. Malfoy had learned that much from the man he was imitating. It simply arranged the truth so the reader drew the false conclusion. A child of 8, it observed, could not possibly manage 21 Wisengamot seats and half the freehold of Diagon Alley. So who was managing them? A foreign bank, a non-human power with interests of its own that had taken an orphan into its keeping and now voted the balance of magical Britain's government through his small hand. Was this not, the article asked, with wounded patriotic concern, a quiet conquest? Had the Wisengamot in its sentiment over a famous child handed the goblins of Gringotts a controlling interest in the realm? Ought there not to be, for the boy's own protection and the nation's, some limit on how much of Britain a child and his inhuman handlers could hold? It's the wardship again, Harry said, setting it down. The same move he lost in the chamber. He couldn't take my estate by calling me a child who needs protecting. So now he's calling me a child who's been captured by the goblins, and the protection becomes patriotism. It's the same door. He's just painted it a different color and hoped I wouldn't check the hinges. It is a strong move, Ironclaw said, and there was old anger in his flat voice, the worn smooth anger of 400 years. Because it is the one fear in this country older than the fear of dark wizards. They have always feared us. The article does not have to be believed. It only has to be repeated. Print it once and every frightened pureblood in Britain will say to his neighbor, they're letting the goblins run the country through that boy, and the neighbor will say it to his, and by the week's end it will be true in the only way that matters in politics, true enough to act on. He looked at Harry. This is the weapon you bought in the spring and did not use. The board believed you meant nothing by owning it. Lord Malfoy believed the prophet was still his to aim. Now you will teach them both otherwise. No, Harry said, not yet. Hale blinked. You'll let it run. I'll let them think it's going to run. Harry was already turning it over, the engine catching. If I kill the story, Malfoy learns I own the paper. That's worth a lot. It's worth more than this one article. The moment he knows the prophet is mine, he stops using it, and I lose the chance to watch what he tries to put in it. Weapons most useful when the enemy thinks it's still in his hand and not yours. He tapped the draft, so we don't spike it, we change it, quietly. The sub-editor came to me for review, which means the proprietor's review is part of the paper's own process and no one downstairs thinks it's strange, so the proprietor reviews. And the article that runs on Tuesday won't be the article Malfoy wrote. It'll be the article I write under the same headline, so he thinks his ran until he reads it. The article ran on Tuesday under Malfoy's headline, and it was not Malfoy's article. Goblin Gold, wizard boy, who really controls the Potter fortune. And then, beneath it, a measured, devastating piece of journalism that asked the question honestly and answered it with documents. It explained the conservatorship, that the bank managed the estate on the boy's instruction. Bound by a contract the boy could end at will. exactly as any wealthy miner's estate was managed, the only difference being that this miner instructed his managers personally, and with a competence the article described, with quotes from 3 named lords of the Wisengamot, as frankly alarming in one so young. It explained in a sidebar the actual history of the dormant estates, that they had been administered not by goblins but by the ministry, by a registrar now under investigation for embezzling them for 11 years, and that the boy's reclamations had removed the estates from the control of a thief and returned them to lawful, audited, transparent management. And it closed with a single quiet paragraph noting that the original draft of this very article had taken a different view, and that the Prophet's proprietor had reviewed it, and that the proprietor wished the public to know the paper would not, under its current ownership, be a weapon for any faction, however powerful, however silver-haired. It did not name Malfoy. It did not have to. Malfoy read the last paragraph at his own breakfast table and understood, all at once, 3 things: that the Prophet was not his, that it had not been his for months, and that the boy had let him write a story and then printed the truth over it, so that the whole of Britain would watch Lucius Malfoy's own weapon turn in his own hand and cut him. The fear of Goblin's story died on the page it was born on. And every person in magical Britain who had been about to whisper their letting the goblins run the country through that boy read instead, over their morning tea, that the boy had personally caught the ministry stealing and had hired the goblins to stop it, which made him, in the space of one breakfast, not a captured child but a competent young lord cleaning up a mess the grown-ups had made. "He'll know now," Hale said, reading the run copy with open delight. "Malfoy, he'll know the paper's yours." "He'll know," Harry agreed. "That's fine. He spent his one good move on it. Let him know I have the press now that the press has already done its work. The fear was the weapon. I fired it back at him empty. Now he has to find a new one, and new weapons take time to forge, and time is the one thing I keep taking from them." He set the paper aside. "But he won't forge the next one alone. The Prophet was his move, and it failed publicly, which means he can't afford another public failure. So the next one won't be public. Dumbledore told me they lose in the open and answer in the dark. This is them moving to the dark. Watch the ministry. Watch for something quiet. A bill no one's reading. A clause in someone else's law. That's where it'll come from now." It came from exactly there, and Hale found it because Hale read everything, including the things no one was meant to read. "A bill," he said, grim, spreading parchment across the long table 3 days later. "Tabled by a backbench lord no one has ever heard of, buried in a package of minor administrative reforms, the kind that pass on the nod because no one troubles to read them. Clause 9, he set his finger on it, an amendment to the law of lordships. It provides, in language so dry it could put out a fire, that no person below the age of magical majority may exercise the active powers of a lordship, including the casting of Wisengamot seats, the said powers to be held in suspense and administered by a guardian appointed by the chief warlock until the lord attains his majority." The chamber was quiet. Even Ironclaw, who was rarely surprised, went still. "It's the wardship," Harry said slowly. Again, the 3rd time. "They lost it as custody. They lost it as patriotism. Now it's a law. They're not trying to ward me anymore. They're trying to make it illegal for anyone my age to do what I'm doing, and the law just happens to hand my suspended powers to a guardian appointed by Dumbledore." He looked up. "It's aimed at me, only me. There's no other emancipated child lord in Britain. They've written a law that names no names and hits exactly one person. That's clever. That's the cleverest thing they've done. A custody order is personal," the chamber saw through it, "but a law is principle. Who could argue against a sensible rule that children shouldn't run the government? It sounds like wisdom. It's a knife wrapped in a principle." "And it will pass," said Hale heavily, "because most of the chamber doesn't attend, and the ones who do won't read a backbench administrative package, and the bill is seconded and whipped quietly by Malfoy's block and tacitly blessed by Dumbledore's, and the 2 of them together on a sleepy session with no one watching, on a sleepy session with no one watching," Harry repeated. He had gone very still, and the cold, clear, patient thing was working behind his eyes. "That's the assumption. That it passes quietly because no one's watching and no one's counting." He stood abruptly. "So we make sure everyone's watching, and we count first." And while Harry made the visible moves, the press, the count, the things his enemies were meant to watch, one of those enemies stopped watching the board entirely and began, alone in the dark, to do the unwatched thing that would end him. Corvus Yaxley had not slept well since the day the Peveril filings landed on his desk, and he had not slept at all since the Aurors first came to ask, very politely, about certain discrepancies in the dormant accounts. He knew how it went from here. He had spent 11 years in the ministry. He had watched it happen to other men, first the polite questions, then the less polite ones. Then the audit complete and Goblin witnessed, and then the dark wing, where they put the men whose crimes were too quiet for the ordinary cells and too large for mercy. He sat in his office after the others had gone home, with a single candle and a bottle, and he did the arithmetic he had been avoiding, and the arithmetic came out the same every way he ran it. There was no version of the next 6 months in which Corvus Yaxley remained a free man. The boy had seen to that. The boy, with his goblins and his solicitor and his maddening, lawful patience, had built a trap with no exit, and the worst of it, the thing Yaxley turned over and over in the candlelight until it became a kind of madness, was that the boy had not even done it cruelly. He had simply read the books and counted the gold and let the law do the rest, the way a man sets a snare and walks away, indifferent to whether the thing in it suffers. Lucius had told him to be reasonable. To make a reasonable law and wait, but Lucius was not the one going to Azkaban. Lucius would survive the bill's failure if it failed. Lucius always survived. Lucius had the silver tongue and the old name and the long memory of who owed him what. Yaxley had a candle and a bottle and a confession waiting to be signed in someone else's handwriting. A reasonable man waits, Yaxley thought. A reasonable man has something to wait for. He rose unsteadily and crossed to the locked drawer at the bottom of his desk, the one he had kept locked for 3 years, since before the boy had ever come to the bank, since the day Yaxley had first understood that a Peveril heir might someday wake and that a careful man prepares for the worst day before it arrives. He had placed his clerk in Gringotts that year, against exactly this. He had not known then what he would do with what the clerk might bring him. He had told himself it was only prudence. A man in his position took precautions. That was all it had been. That was all it was. He unlocked the drawer. Inside, on a square of dark cloth, lay a small stoppered vial, and in the vial, dried to a dark crust on the glass, were 7 drops of blood that a records clerk had taken from a silver dish 3 years before. On the one afternoon the most carefully hidden boy in Britain had bled in the open, and had then, at his master's quiet instruction, for reasons the clerk had not asked and had been paid well not to ask, failed to clean the dish entirely before it was put away. Yaxley looked at the vial for a long time. He was not by nature a man who reached for the old magic. The old magic was filth. Everyone knew it was filth, the kind of working that the statute of houses itself forbade, that carried not the dark wing but worse, that fell on the caster as readily as the cast upon if it were done wrong. A reasonable man did not touch it. A reasonable man had something to lose. But Corvus Yaxley, sitting in the candlelight with the dark wing in front of him and a bottle behind him and 7 drops of a boy's blood in his hand, was no longer, by any honest measure, a reasonable man. He was a desperate one. And the boy's old enemy in the high tower had warned the boy of exactly this, in a corridor beneath the ministry, in words Yaxley would never hear and would, in any case, not have heeded. That a man with nothing left to lose is the dangerous kind, because the things that restrain reasonable men, consequence, ruin, the fear of the dark wing, have already happened to him in his mind, and a man who has already been ruined in his own head will reach for anything. Yaxley wrapped his hand around the vial. He did not cast it that night. He was not yet that far gone, and the working took preparation and a safe house, and a night when the wards around a certain narrow house in a certain fold of London might be probed without the goblins noticing. He had time to talk himself out of it. He had, in fact, several weeks. But sitting there in the guttering light, with the boy's blood warm in his fist for the first time in 3 years, Corvus Yaxley made the decision that would end him, not in a flash of rage, but slowly, the way a man decides to step off a high place, by standing at the edge long enough that the falling begins to seem like the only thing left to do. If he was going to the dark wing regardless, he thought, then he would not go alone. He would not go beaten by a child. He would reach one last time for the one thing the child's gold and goblins and law could not protect, the blood itself. The channel the boy's own wards were built to keep open, and he would walk the most powerful lord in Britain out of his own front door in his bare feet at 2 in the morning, and after that, whatever happened, at least it would not have been the boy who won. He did not know about the ring. None of them ever remembered the ring. It was the one thing the boy had that could not be read in a ledger or counted in a chamber, and so the men who lived by ledgers and chambers forgot it every time, until the night it broke there working on the threshold of an ancient house and fell back on the hand that cast it. But that was still some weeks away. On this night there was only a candle and a bottle and a desperate man and 7 drops of blood, and the slow, terrible arithmetic of a person who has decided he has nothing left to lose. Harry, a few miles away, bent over his whip count and felt none of it. But some animal part of him, the part the cupboard had trained, the part that had kept him alive in a house that wished him gone, was uneasy that week, and he did not know why, and he had learned long ago never to ignore that particular unease. He simply could not yet see what it was warning him of. He spent the next 4 days doing arithmetic, which was the thing he was best at, and the arithmetic was a whip count. This was the part Ironclaw had taught him that no one expected of a child. That power in a chamber is not speeches, it is counting, knowing before the vote exactly how every lord will vote and why, and changing the ones you can and neutralizing the ones you can't. Harry had 21 seats of his own. He needed a working majority of the lords who actually attended, and he had 4 days to build it, and he built it the way he had reclaimed the alley, 1 tenant at a time, fairly, so that they would do well by standing with him and know it. Greengrass brought him the neutrals, house by house, in the cold, elegant drawing-room, and Harry sat across from each of them and did not flatter and did not threaten, but simply explained what the bill said, who had written it, what it was for, and what it would mean for their houses if the principle stood, that the chief warlock could, by a sensible-sounding law, suspend the powers of any lord he found inconvenient and hand them to a guardian of his choosing. Today it's a child, Harry told them. It's always a child first, because a child is easy to be reasonable about. But a law that lets the chief warlock suspend an emancipated lord and seize his seats doesn't stay aimed at children. You wrote the emancipation exception 1,000 years ago to protect your own houses from exactly this. This bill repeals it for one person now and all of you later. I'm not asking you to stand with me. I'm asking you to stand with your own grandsons. It was not flattery and it was not a threat, and it was true, which was why it worked. Augusta Longbottom brought him the old families, by the simple expedient of telling them that the House of Longbottom would remember, for 3 generations, who voted to put the heir of Gryffindor under guardianship, and the House of Longbottom's memory was a thing the old families had learned to respect. And Ogden brought him the honest men, of whom there were more than Harry had expected, because 50 years of losing had taught Tiberius Ogden exactly who in that chamber would do the right thing if someone finally gave them the numbers to make it safe. By the 4th day, Harry had his count. The bill would fail narrowly if it came to a vote, but it would fail. He had the majority. Which was, he understood, precisely the moment to be most careful, because a beaten enemy who can count 2 will not bring a vote he knows he'll lose. He'll change the game again. They'll pull the bill, Harry told Ironclaw and Hale the night before the session, or move it to a different day, or attach it to something else. The moment Malfoy's whip realizes we've outcounted him, they won't walk into a vote they'll lose in the open. So either they retreat, or the bill was never the real move. The bill was the thing I was supposed to be looking at. He stood at the window of number 12, looking out at magical London in the dark, and the cold, clear, patient place in him was very quiet, the way it went quiet when it had found the shape of a thing and did not like the shape. Dumbledore said the knife comes in a corridor where I'm 8 and far from my bank. The prophet was loud. The bill is loud. They're both things I can see. And while I've spent 4 days counting votes on a bill they'll never bring, he turned from the window. What have I stopped watching? The answer came at 2 in the morning, and it did not come as a vote or an article or a law. It came as old magic, and it came for his blood. Harry woke in the dark of number 12, with the Deepwater ring blazing cold on his hand, not warm, the way it had been since the day he put it on, but cold. A deep, aching cold that woke him out of sleep like a hand on the back of the neck, and the house was screaming. Not aloud. The house screamed the way the house did everything, under the floor and the walls, a deep, silent alarm that ran up through the soles of his bare feet as he came out onto the landing. The wards were under assault. Not battered, battering, the house could have told him, would have rung a different note. This was subtler and far worse. Something was reaching through the wards, not breaking them, finding the one channel they could not close, because it was a channel the wards themselves were built to keep open. Blood. The wards knew his blood and protected it, and so they could not refuse a working that came addressed to it. He understood, standing on the landing in the screaming house with the ring gone cold as the grave on his hand, that this was the real move. Not custody, not patriotism, not law. Those had been the loud things, the things to make him count and read and look, while in the dark a desperate man, and a desperate man was the one truly dangerous kind. Dumbledore had said so. Yaxley had nothing left to lose, assembled an older and filthier instrument, a blood claim, a binding. A working drawn from the oldest and most forbidden corner of the law Harry had been so carefully studying, that could be laid upon the blood of an heir to compel him, to call him out of his protections, to draw him to a place in a hand, to make a child of 8 simply get up and walk to the people who meant to take him. He felt it pulling. That was the horror of it. He felt the working catch in his blood like a hook and pull, gently, insistently, toward the door. Come out, come to us, come to the corridor where you are only a child, and he felt his own bare feet take a step toward the stairs before he had decided to, and he understood, cold all through, that they had found the one door he could not check, because it was the door inside his own veins. And then the ring answered. It did not blaze with light or thunder or do any of the theatrical things. It did something quieter and infinitely more final. The deep cold in it turned all at once to deep and terrible warmth, the warmth of a forge, of a hearth at the center of an ancient house, and it rose up Harry's arm and through his chest and met the hook in his blood, and the Peveril signet, older than the bank, older than Merlin, the ring that knew the heir absolutely and would suffer no hand not of the blood to compel him, simply closed the door. He felt the working break. Not pushed back, broken, the way a wave breaks on stone that has stood 1,000 years and will stand 1,000 more, and somewhere out in the dark of magical London he felt, very faintly, the recoil of it strike the one who had cast it, because old magic is a contract, and a contract dishonored falls on the one who broke it. And then in the warmth of the ring, in the screaming house gone suddenly quiet, Harry heard, not with his ears, the voice of the house itself, or the line itself, or the deep water in the stone, the thing that had waited 100 years and woken for him alone, and it said without words, the 3 words carved over the chair in the great hall of the manor, the last shall keep. The house had kept him. The blood had kept him. The ring had kept him. He was the last of an ancient line, and the line did not lose its last son to a hook in the dark. Harry stood on the landing, shaking, alive, the ring warm and certain on his hand, and did not cry and did not call out and did not for one moment lose the cold, clear, patient place, because even now, even with the recoil still echoing out in the dark, the engine in him was already turning, already asking the only question that mattered: who cast it, and how do I prove it? And how do I make them pay for it in the open, where they are weakest, with their own law, the way I promised Ironclaw I would? He went downstairs and woke the fire and sat at the long table, and by the time Ironclaw arrived at dawn, the goblin had felt the wards cry out across half of London and come at a dead run, which Harry would remember later as the moment he understood the bank's loyalty was not only a contract. Harry had already written out in an 8-year-old's careful hand exactly what had happened, and exactly what it meant, and exactly what he intended to do about it. A blood binding, Ironclaw said, reading it, and his flat voice had gone flatter than Harry had ever heard it, which on a goblin was the sound of fury. Cast at a most ancient house, at a child. This is not politics, Lord Peveril. This is the oldest crime in our law and in yours both. There are houses that went to war for less. There are wizards in Azkaban for less. He set the parchment down. Whoever did this has stopped playing the game you have been winning. They have reached for a thing that, if you can prove it, ends them, not leashes them, not embarrasses them, ends them in the dark wing of the prison forever, which means they are certain you cannot prove it. A blood binding leaves no mark on the victim. It is cast at a distance on a sample of blood, a hair, a drop, anything taken from you perhaps years ago. He looked up sharply. Where would they have got your blood, boy? And Harry, who had spent his whole life having things taken from him, knew the answer before the goblin finished asking, and it was so simple and so cruel that he almost laughed. The test, he said, the heritage parchment, 7 drops in a silver dish. He met Ironclaw's eyes, who had access to that dish before it was cleaned. The silence in the room was absolute. It was not cleaned by goblin hands, Ironclaw said slowly, and now there was something in his voice that Harry had never heard, the cold horror of a creature discovering a wound in its own honor. There was a clerk that day, a records clerk, Bogrod's assistant, recently hired, well-recommended, papers in order. His hands had gone very still on the table. Recommended by a house with a seat on no committee that should have touched the bank's hiring. Recommended when I check it, and I will check it within the hour, by a man with everything to lose and nothing left to lose it with. He rose. Yaxley. He placed a clerk in the bank before your test, against exactly the day you would come, because a man who has skimmed dormant estates for 11 years is a man who plans for the heir's arrival. He took your blood from the dish. And when you broke him in open court and the Aurors came for his accounts, he used the one weapon he had been saving for the worst day, the day he had nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing left to lose, Harry said quietly, is the dangerous kind. Dumbledore told me that too. He keeps telling me true things. He stood. So here's how we end it. Ironclaw, the bank was the scene of the theft. Your honor was the thing breached. I want the bank to find that clerk and find the blood and find the working, and I want it found by goblin cursebreakers, because a goblin cursebreaker's testimony about a crime committed in Gringotts is the one kind of evidence even the Ministry's 200-year policy can't wave away. It's a crime against the bank, on the bank's ground, witnessed by the bank. And I want Madame Bones brought in the moment you have it, because she's honest, and because a blood binding on a child is exactly the kind of thing she opened a department to stop. He looked at the goblin. You wanted your honor back. They stole from a client inside your own walls and turned the theft into an attack on a child. Get it back. For a moment, Ironclaw simply looked at him. Then the goblin bowed fully from the waist, the bow he had given Harry only twice before, at the test and at the contract, and said, in a voice like a vault door opening, Lord Peveril, it will be the bank's very great pleasure. Bill Weasley found the clerk. He came back to number 12 2 days later, still in his cursebreaker's leathers, dusty from a chase that had run from a bolt hole in Knockturn Alley to a smuggler's berth on the Cornish coast, Harry's coast, Peveril ground, where the man had been trying to take ship out of Britain, and he came back with the clerk in goblin irons, and more importantly, with the thing the clerk had been carrying. A stoppered vial of dark blood, 7 drops, a century of Peveril heritage in a thief's pocket, and beside it the half-burned remains of the working itself, the binding script the recoil had scorched out of the man's hands when the ring broke it. He confessed before we made the coast, Bill said, dropping into a chair, accepting tea, looking at Harry with something complicated in his face, the warmth that had been there since Privet Drive, and under it now a new wariness, the wariness of a decent man who has watched a child he likes turn out to be something formidable. Yaxley hired him. Yaxley took the blood. Yaxley cast the binding 2 nights ago from a safe house. Bones's Aurors are turning over right now. He's named it all because the alternative we offered him was the goblins keeping him, and he'd rather have the Aurors. Bill set down the tea. Harry. He'd have walked you out of this house in your bare feet at 2 in the morning and handed you to a man who'd have used you to unfreeze his accounts and then, well, a man with nothing to lose holding a boy who owns half of Britain. It doesn't end with you coming home. He was quiet a moment. The ring saved you, you know that. If you hadn't put the ring on in the spring, if you'd been any other rich orphan with goblin lawyers and no old blood, that working would have walked you straight out the door. I know, Harry said. He looked at the vial of his own blood on the table and at the scorched binding script beside it and at the cursebreaker who had chased a man across Britain to bring them back. Bill, you felt the wards cry out that first night and you came running, so did Ironclaw. Neither of you had to. The contract doesn't say come running when the boys' wards scream at 2 in the morning. He met the young man's eyes. Thank you for coming up the steps in Surrey and for coming running and for chasing him to the coast. I don't have a lot of people. I count the ones I have. You're on the list. I wanted you to know you're on the list. And Bill Weasley, 18 and dusty and a long way from the easy boy who had peeled an orange in this same house in the spring, looked at the strange, formidable child who had just thanked him like a lord acknowledging a debt, and his face cracked into the warm grin Harry remembered, and he said, yeah, well, somebody's got to keep an eye on you, you menace. Might as well be the Weasleys. We're cheap and we're loyal, and there's a lot of us. He reached over and ruffled Harry's hair, which no one had done in Harry's entire life, and Harry let him, which surprised them both. The end of it came in open court, where Harry was strongest, exactly as he had promised himself it would. He did not have to make a speech this time. The bank did it for him. The director of Gringotts came again to the Wisengamot twice in one season after 3 centuries of never, and laid before the chamber the vial, the working, the goblin cursebreaker's sworn account of a crime committed inside the bank, against a client on the bank's own ground, by an agent placed there for the purpose. And Amelia Bones rose, monocle glinting, and stated in her flat, hard, trustworthy voice that the Department of Magical Law Enforcement had taken Corvus Yaxley into custody for the casting of a blood binding upon a minor of a most ancient house. A crime, she reminded the chamber, that carried the dark wing of Azkaban and no possibility of release, and that his confession had named, as well, certain persons who had known of his intentions and chosen not to prevent them. She did not say Malfoy, but she looked for a moment at the silver-haired lord in the high tiers, and the whole chamber understood that the investigation was not finished, and that the next quiet room Amelia Bones invited Lucius Malfoy into might not let him leave so easily. And Cornelius Fudge, ambitious, soft, vain Cornelius Fudge, who had hitched his wagon to Malfoy's gold and watched that wagon roll all season toward a cliff, Cornelius Fudge did the thing that ambitious, soft, vain men always do when the wind changes, and changed with it. He rose in open session and declared himself shocked, deeply shocked, to learn the lengths to which certain parties had gone, and announced that he personally would be lending the full weight of the senior undersecretary's office to Madame Bones's investigation, and that he had always held the deepest admiration for the remarkable young Lord Potter Peverell. It was a betrayal of Malfoy so naked that even Malfoy's own block winced. And it was, Harry understood, watching it happen, the precise moment the enemy coalition broke, because a conspiracy held together by Malfoy's gold could not survive Malfoy's gold becoming dangerous to hold, and Fudge, by defecting first and loudest, had given every minor lord in Malfoy's pocket permission to do the same. The block that had whipped the wardship in the bill and blessed the prophet story dissolved, in a single afternoon, into 50 men each scrambling to have been on the boys' side all along. The bill to bar minors from lordships was never brought to a vote. It died on the order paper unmourned. The wardship was dead. The prophet was his. Yaxley was bound for the Dark Wing. Malfoy was leashed, the debt restructured on Harry's terms, the proxy surrendered, the man himself now a single thread in Amelia Bones's patient hands. Knowing it, knowing the boy had chosen not to pull it yet, which was its own kind of leash, the cruelest kind, the kind you wear in public while everyone watches you pretend it isn't there. The establishment had thrown its best, custody, patriotism, law, and finally the oldest, filthiest magic it had, and it had lost all of it to a child of 8 who had simply read more carefully, counted more honestly, and refused, every single time, to be moved out of the rooms where he was strong. Dumbledore came to him one last time before the season ended, and he came not as chief warlock and not with a move, but as an old man alone to number 12, which Harry permitted because the wards would have screamed if the old man meant harm, and the wards were quiet. They sat by the fire. Dumbledore looked older than he had in the spring, and the twinkle was gone, and for once he did not arrange the truth at all. He simply told it. I have spent this season, he said, being outplayed by a child, and I have had time to ask myself why it troubled me so much more than being outplayed by Grindelwald, or by Voldemort, or by any of the great dark men I have spent my life standing against. And I have my answer, and I will give it to you, because I think you have earned one honest thing from me, and I have given you so few. He looked into the fire. It troubled me because they wanted power, and I understood them. You do not want power, Harry. You have taken more of it this season than any man alive, and you do not want it. You want to never be at anyone's mercy again, that is all. Everything you have done, the seats, the gold, the bank, the law you have made into a weapon, all of it is a child building walls so high that no one can ever again put him in a cupboard. And I cannot fight that, I do not even want to. Because I am the man who built him the cupboard, and I have no standing left to tell him to stop building the walls. He turned from the fire. I came to say I am sorry, not the arranged sorry I offered you in the bank, the one with a string on it, the real one. I read your father's note. I read it the week he died, and I sealed it anyway because I was certain, I am always certain, it is my great gift and my great disease that I knew better than a dead man what his son needed. I was wrong. He knew exactly, and you have spent 8 years paying for my certainty, and I am sorry, and there is no string on it, and I do not expect it to mean anything, because an apology from the man who built the cupboard is worth very little. But it is true, and I wanted you to have one true thing from me freely before you go to Hogwarts and find me waiting there in a castle that is, it turns out, partly yours. Harry looked at the old man for a long time. He felt the pull of it, the same pull he had felt in the bank, the pull of an adult who saw him clearly and admitted he was wrong, the one thing Harry had wanted his whole life. It was real this time. He could tell there was no string, and he understood, sitting there, that the most dangerous thing about Albus Dumbledore was not his cleverness or his power or his certainty. It was that he was, underneath all of it, a genuinely good man who did genuinely terrible things for genuinely good reasons, and that a boy could spend his whole life trying to decide whether to forgive him, and lose himself in the deciding. So Harry did not decide, he did something harder. I believe you, he said. I believe it's true, and I believe there's no string, and I believe you're sorry. He paused. And it doesn't change anything because sorry is about you, and I'm done arranging my life around what's happening inside you. You can be sorry. You can be the man who built the cupboard and regrets it. Both of those can be true, and I can still never ever hand you an inch of power over me again, because being sorry doesn't make you safe, it just makes you sad, and I'm not responsible for your sadness any more than I was responsible for being a burden. He stood and the firelight caught the Deepwater ring. You'll be waiting at Hogwarts in a castle that's partly mine. Good, I'll see you there. We'll be something, not friends, not enemies maybe if you keep doing the true things and stop doing the moves. Two people who keep accounts, watching each other across a chamber that's older than both of us. That's the most I have to offer you, Chief Warlock, and it's more than you'd have got if you'd come with a string. He held out his hand the way a lord did. Thank you for the true thing. Now please go home. I have a Hogwarts letter coming any day, and I'd like to be myself when it does, and not somebody who spent the evening forgiving you. Albus Dumbledore looked at the offered hand of the 8-year-old who had beaten him at every turn and was now, with terrible gentleness, declining to be his absolution. And the old man took the hand and shook it and smiled a real smile, sad and clear and entirely without honey, and said, "Your mother would be so proud of you that it would frighten her. Good night, Lord Peveril," and he went home. The letter came 3 days later. Harry was at the long table in number 12, going over the autumn's reclamation schedule with Hale, when the owl tapped at the window, a school owl, ordinary brown, bearing a thick envelope of yellowish parchment addressed in emerald green ink to Mr. H. Potter, the master bedroom, number 12 Peveril Row, London, because the castle, it seemed, knew exactly where he slept, and exactly that the cupboard under the stairs was 100 miles and an entire lifetime behind him. He opened it. He read it. We are pleased to inform you that you have a place at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He had 3 years to wait. Still, the letter came, as it came to all of them, the summer before the September he would turn 11, and Harry was 8, which meant the castle had sent it early, or time in this story had run faster than the calendar, the way it does in the telling of a life that is about to change. But the letter was real, and it was his, and he set it on the table beside the Deepwater ring and looked at it for a while. 3 years, Hale said quietly. 3 years to finish the reclamations, settle the seats, build the walls all the way up. And then you walk into that castle holding more of Britain than any first year in its history, into a school you partone with a headmaster you've beaten and a board chairman you've leashed, and you'll be 11 years old, and they'll all have to pretend they're teaching you. He shook his head. I almost feel sorry for them, almost. Harry looked at the letter and at the ring and out the window at magical London going about its evening, certain of so many things that were no longer true. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs and the list taped to the door, and the boy who had taught himself not to want things because wanting only ever got him trouble. 3 years, Harry agreed. And then very quietly, with the cold, clear, patient thing in him gone, for once entirely warm, good, I'll be ready, let them try to teach me. Far to the north, on a gray headland over a gray sea, a house that had waited 100 years burned its windows gold against the dark, and was glad because the last of the line was coming into his own at last. And far to the south, in a castle that did not yet know how much of it belonged to the boy with the letter, the oldest magic in Britain stirred in its deep foundations, and turned, the way the stone in the ring had turned, toward the heir who was, at last, awake. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Lord of half of Britain, 3 years did to Harry Potter what 3 years do to a blade left in the hands of a master. They did not change what he was, they only finished it. He was 11 now, and the morning of the 1st of September found him standing in the great hall of Peveril Manor, on the grey headland over the grey sea, where it had all become real in a chair that was his, except the chair was full now of him, and he no longer needed the sea to tell him he existed. He wore traveling robes of Peveril black with the deep-water sheen, cut by the bank's seamstresses to a boy who had grown into his own shoulders, and on his finger the signet sat warm and certain, sized to a hand that no longer looked borrowed. He had been for 3 years the most powerful single voice in the government of magical Britain, and he had spent those 3 years learning to carry it the way a man learns to carry his own height, so that no one watching could see it was an effort, because by the end it was not. The reclamations were finished. The golden river of names, framed now and hung in the long gallery at the manor, glowed gold along its entire length, every dormant house come home, every seat seated, every estate restored to audited light. He held, by the final count, the houses of Potter and Peveril and 29 reverted houses besides, and the Wisengamot had long since stopped pretending that any law passed in Britain passed without the consent of the boy who held a third of its chamber in one hand. The Gryffindor stake had been formalized quietly by Hale over 18 patient months, until the founder's charter named Harry not as a rumor in the bank's oldest ledgers but as a matter of ministry record. Heir of Gryffindor, one of the 4 landlords of Hogwarts, holder of a founder's voice in the governance of the school he was, that very morning, about to attend as a first year. The irony of it had stopped being funny to him somewhere in the second year and become, instead, simply a fact, the way the size of his fortune had stopped being astonishing and become a fact, the way everything became a fact eventually when you looked at it long enough in the cold, clear, patient place. And the crown debt had been acknowledged. That had been the sweetest of the slow victories, a single line in the ministry's annual accounts, fought for through 3 sessions and won at last, where the government of magical Britain formally recognized that it owed the House of Peveril a sum so large that the recognizing of it had changed, fundamentally and forever, the relationship between the ministry and the boy. A government does not order about its largest creditor. It is polite to him. It is, when he is 11 and holds a third of the Wisengamot besides, extremely polite to him. Harry looked out at the grey sea one last time before the journey, and the 100 dead Peverils looked down from the walls, and over the high-backed chair the 3 words stood carved in stone, worn nearly smooth, that had broken a binding in the dark and kept the last of the line. The last shall keep. I kept it, Harry said, to the house, to the dead, to the sea. All of it. I'm going to school now. I'll be back at Christmas. And the windows of Peveril Manor burned gold behind him as he left, the way they had burned the night he first came home, and the house was glad and let him go. Bill Weasley met him on platform 9 3/4, because Bill always met him at the thresholds, Surrey, the bank, the coast, and now this, and because over 3 years the Weasleys had become the thing Harry had never had and had stopped believing he would. Not allies, not contracts, not seats in a chamber, but the warm, loud, ordinary thing that other children took for granted. Family, very nearly. The cheap and loyal and numerous kind Bill had promised. There he is, Bill said, grinning, a fang still in his ear and a scar at his temple that hadn't been there 3 years ago. Curse-breaking had grown more dangerous, or Bill had grown more reckless, and Harry had opinions about which and kept them to himself. Lord of half of Britain, off to learn to levitate a feather with the rest of the 11-year-olds. You're sure about this? You could buy the school, skip to the end. I part-own the school, Harry said. It's different. And I want to learn it properly from the bottom. You don't really hold a thing until you understand it from the bottom. The cupboard taught me that, if it taught me anything. He looked down the platform at the scarlet engine breathing steam, at the river of children and trunks and owls and weeping mothers, and something in his chest did a thing it had learned to do only in the last 3 years, in the warmth of the manor and the loudness of the Weasleys. It opened, without his deciding it should, the rest of the way. Besides, I've never been to school where anyone wanted me there. I'd like to find out what it's like. A woman descended on them, short, round, red-haired, fierce with love, towing a gaggle of red-headed children and a cauldron, and a fat grey rat someone was crying about, and Molly Weasley took one look at Harry, and did the thing that no contract and no seat and no founder's charter had ever done. She folded him into a hug, brisk and total and entirely without calculation, and said, "There you are, love, Bill's told us everything. You'll sit with Ron. He's a first year too, and he's nervous as a cat. Do you have a jumper?" It gets cold on the train, and Harry, who held a third of the Wisengamot and could have bought the railway, stood in the embrace of a woman who wanted nothing from him but to make sure he had a jumper, and discovered that there was, after all, one kind of power he had never reclaimed, because it could not be reclaimed, only given. "I have a jumper, Mrs. Weasley," he managed. "Thank you. You'll have one of mine by Christmas regardless," she said. "Ron, come and meet Harry. And for heaven's sake stop crying about the rat, Percy. It's a rat." The Malfoy boy was on the platform too, pale and pointed and immaculate, and Harry watched the small drama of it play out with the detached interest of a man watching a chess problem he has already solved. Draco Malfoy had been raised 3 years ago to be a prince of the realm, the heir of the richest house in Britain, taught to expect the world to part before him. And then his father had been leashed in open court by a child, and the Malfoy fortune had been restructured under that child's terms, and the proxies surrendered, and the family name spoken in certain rooms with a new and careful pity. Draco had spent 3 years being the son of the man the boy beat, and it had done something to him, bent him, the way Harry himself had been bent, though in a different direction, into something defensive and brittle and watchful. He came toward Harry on the platform because he could not help it, drawn the way the beaten are always drawn to the one who beat their house, and he stopped a careful distance away, and his pale eyes went over Harry's peveril black and the Deepwater ring and the Weasleys at his shoulder, and he said in a voice pitched to be overheard, "So it's true. Potter's gone over to the blood traitors and the goblins both. Father says you'll regret picking the losing side." It was a child's line fed to him by a leashed father who needed to believe his own defeat was temporary, and Harry heard underneath it the thing the boy could not say: "You broke my house and I don't know who I am anymore." And Harry, who knew exactly what it was to be a child broken by an adult's certainty, did the one thing Draco Malfoy could not possibly have braced for. He was kind. "Your father's wrong about which side is losing," Harry said quietly so that only Draco could hear. The performance dropped. "But he's not wrong that he picked one, and he's not wrong that you're paying for it, and that's not fair because you didn't pick it, he did, before you were born, and you've spent 3 years carrying a debt you never agreed to." He paused. "I know what that's like, better than you'd think, so here's a thing you can do with it or not, your choice." He held the pale boy's eyes. "You're not your father, Malfoy. You don't have to spend the next 7 years being the son of the man I beat. You could just be a person who happens to be at school with me. I'm not going to be cruel to you for what Lucius did. I'm not going to be kind to you for it either. You just be a person, starting fresh. Nobody's heir, nobody's debt, for the length of a train ride at least." He shrugged. "Or you can do the line your father gave you, and we can be enemies for 7 years because of a war we didn't start. Up to you. I genuinely don't mind either way, but I thought somebody should offer you the door because nobody ever offered me one, and I remember what it cost." Draco Malfoy stared at him. Whatever he had been braced for, triumph, cruelty, the cold contempt of the victor, it had not been this, and it left him with nothing to push against, exactly as Harry had once stood before Dumbledore with nothing to push against, and Harry watched the boy's careful, brittle mask flicker just once over something young and lost underneath. Draco started and didn't finish and turned and walked away fast toward his mother. "That was decent of you," Bill said quietly behind him. "More than the little snob deserved." "It wasn't for him," Harry said, watching the pale boy go. "Not really, it was for me. I spent 3 years learning to take things back with the law. I wanted to find out if I could still give something away without one." He turned toward the train. "Turns out I can. Good. I was a little worried." And he climbed aboard the Hogwarts Express, into a compartment with a nervous red-headed boy and a fat gray rat, and the Scarlet Engine pulled out of the station carrying the most powerful lord in Britain to the first place in his life that had ever, in emerald green ink, told him he had a place. Ron Weasley did not know who Harry was for the first hour, which was, Harry decided, the single best hour of the entire journey. The boy knew the name, everyone knew the name, but he had not connected the famous boy who lived, or the mysterious Lord Potter Peveril whose doings filled the prophet his parents read, with the dark-haired boy sharing his compartment and his sandwiches and his terror about the sorting. So for 1 hour Harry was simply Harry, a boy on a train, arguing about Quidditch teams he had only read about and trading chocolate frog cards and being, for the first time in his life, 11 years old and nothing else. He found he was rather good at it. The cupboard had not taught him this. There had been no room in the cupboard to practice being ordinary, but the manor had and the Weasleys had, the long loud Sunday lunches over 3 years where no one wanted anything from him. And by the time Ron worked out with a strangled noise that the famous lordling and his sandwich-sharing compartment mate were the same person, Harry had already become his friend, which made the working out a thing that happened to a friend. And not a wall that went up between strangers. "You're him," Ron said, going red. "You're blimey, Mum said be nice to you, and I ate your pumpkin pasties." "You shared yours first," Harry said. "We're even, and I'd rather be Harry who ate your pasties than Lord Potter Peveril for the next 7 years if it's all the same to you, so let's keep it like this. I get enough of the other one." He meant it, and Ron heard that he meant it, and something settled between them that would last, Harry thought, a long time, the particular loyalty of a boy who had liked you before he knew you were worth anything, which was the only kind of loyalty Harry had never been able to buy, and had therefore learned to value above all the rest. The compartment door slid open twice more before the journey ended, and each time it opened on a piece of a life Harry had read about in ledgers and was now, for the first time, meeting in the flesh. The first was a round-faced boy near tears, who asked in a wavering voice whether anyone had seen a toad. Harry knew him before he finished the sentence, not the boy, but the shape of him, the careful, hopeful nervousness of a child raised by someone who expected a great deal and had been disappointed often. And then he saw the boy properly, and something in Harry went still because he knew the face. He had seen it in a portrait in a cold, elegant drawing room hung beside a vulture-trimmed hat. "You're Neville," Harry said. "Neville Longbottom." The boy startled. How did you— "Your grandmother is Augusta Longbottom." Harry stood and held out his hand the way a lord did, except that he did not do it as a lord. He did it as the thing underneath the lord, the boy who had been left in a cupboard while a will named 6 families who would have loved him, and one of those families had been this boy's. "She's one of mine, one of the people who stood with me when almost no one would. She told me she had a grandson." He shook Neville's startled hand. "She also told me she'd buried enough of this country's orphans and that she wanted to make sure what happened to me never happened to another child. I owe her more than I can easily say. So if her grandson's lost a toad, then finding it is the least I can do, and I'm good at finding things. It's most of what I do. Sit down. We'll find your toad." Neville Longbottom sat down as though his legs had been taken out from under him by kindness, which Harry understood they probably had, because a boy raised to be a disappointment does not expect the most famous person on the train to know his grandmother's name and call it a debt of honor. Harry had been that boy. He knew exactly what it cost and exactly what it was worth to have someone just once treat your existence as an asset rather than a burden. "Gran talks about you," Neville admitted, very quietly, going red. She said you were the bravest person she'd ever seen in that chamber, and that you were 8, and that if I ever met you I was to remember that brave isn't about not being scared, it's about being scared and reading the law anyway." He swallowed. "I'm scared all the time. I don't think I'm going to be any good at magic. Gran thinks I might not be magic at all. Nearly didn't get a letter." "You got a letter," Harry said. "The castle doesn't make mistakes about that. I've read how the letters work, the quill in the book. It's old magic and it doesn't guess. You're magic. You're just frightened, and frightened isn't the same as not able. They only look the same from outside, and the people who keep you frightened want you to confuse them, because a frightened boy is an easy boy to manage." He met Neville's eyes, and for a moment he was not 11 and Neville was not 11. They were 2 children who had both been told in different houses by different means that they did not count. "I spent 8 years being told I was nothing. Then I read the books, and it turned out the people telling me were lying, and they were lying for a reason, and the reason was that I was worth a great deal and they needed me not to know it. I'm not saying you're secretly the heir to half of Britain. That job's taken." A flicker of something that was nearly a smile. "I'm saying that you don't count is the one lie that's worth checking every single time, no matter who's telling it, because the people who say it loudest are usually the ones who'd lose the most if you found out it wasn't true. Check it, that's all. Now the toad, what's its name?" "Trevor," said Neville, and his voice was steadier than it had been, as though something had been quietly set right in him. The toad was found within 10 minutes, because Harry was, in fact, very good at finding things, and because the second interruption to the compartment turned out to be a girl with a great deal of wild brown hair and an armful of books in a brisk, anxious, encyclopedic manner, who announced that she was helping Neville look and had already searched 4 carriages and had, naturally, read all the set texts twice. "Hermione Granger," she said, sticking out her hand, and then, seeing Harry's face, her eyes went wide. You're Harry Potter. You're in modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts, and lately you're in the Prophet nearly every week. The youngest lord ever seated in the Wisengamot. They say you control a third of the chamber. Is it true?" "How does that even work? You're our age." "It's true," Harry said, "and it works because I read the boring sections, which is a thing I suspect you already do, Miss Granger, which means you and I are going to get along, and which means you of all people should know better than to believe everything in the Prophet." He paused, even now that the Prophet is rather more careful than it used to be. Hermione Granger looked at him with the dawning delight of a clever child who has just met another clever child and recognized the species. "You found the toad already, didn't you?" she said, "while I searched 4 carriages. He was under the seat by the window. Trevor likes the vibration of the wheels. It's warmer there against the floor." Harry handed the toad to a flushed and grateful Neville. "You searched the carriages because you assumed he'd traveled. I assumed he'd stayed where it was comfortable." "We're both right about how we think, Miss Granger. You'll go further than me at anything that rewards being thorough. I'll go further at anything that rewards being suspicious. Between us, we'd be rather hard to beat." He said it lightly, but he meant it, and he counted both of them, the frightened brave boy and the brilliant anxious girl, among the people worth keeping, because he had learned over 3 years that you found your allies young if you were lucky, and that the ones who liked you before they needed you were the only ones who never sold you later. By the time the train slowed and the lamps of Hogsmeade Station came up out of the dark, the compartment held 4 children instead of 2, and Harry Potter, Lord of half of magical Britain, heir of Gryffindor, the boy the whole country had an opinion about, was arguing happily with Hermione Granger about whether intelligence or instinct mattered more, while Ron refereed badly and Neville held his toad and laughed, and not one of the four of them was, in that moment, anything but 11 years old and going to school. It was, Harry thought, pulling his peveril black around him as the train shuddered to a halt, possibly the most valuable thing he had ever acquired, and it had not cost him a single galleon, and it would not appear on any ledger in any vault in Britain. The bank could not have arranged it, the law could not have compelled it. He had simply been, for one train ride, a person other people liked, and that, it turned out, was the one inheritance no one had been able to steal, because no one had thought it was worth anything, and they had been, as they had been about so much else, entirely and catastrophically wrong. Hogwarts came up out of the dark across a black lake, and Harry, who had seen Gringotts and Peveril Manor and the drowned blue court of the Wisengamot, who owned more of magical Britain than any person alive, looked at the castle that was partly his, lit gold against the mountains, turret upon turret climbing into a sky thick with stars, and forgot for a moment to be anything but a child seeing it for the first time. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He let himself simply see it, one sensory beat, the gold lights doubled in the black water, before the cold, clear, patient place reasserted itself and reminded him that beauty was also a fact, and that this particular beautiful fact belonged, in some measure, that the men inside it had spent a century forgetting, to him. And then the castle did the thing that none of them had warned him about, because none of them had known it would happen, because no heir of Gryffindor awake in his power had crossed the lake in 1,000 years. The castle knew him. He felt at the moment the little boats touched the far shore, the same deep stirring he had felt in number 12, in the manor, in the dormant houses as they woke, the unmistakable sensation of an ancient warded place recognizing the blood of its founder. But where the houses had woken like sleepers, the castle woke like a king. It ran up through the stones of the landing and into the soles of his feet and through the deep-water ring, which flared once deep and cold and then deep and warm, and far above him in the dark he felt the wards of Hogwarts, the oldest and greatest wards in Britain, woven by 4 founders into the living rock, turn, all of them, vast and slow and certain, toward the boy at the water's edge and acknowledge him, not as a student. Heir, as one of the 4 whose blood was written into the foundation, come home at last to a house that had been run by tenants for 1,000 years. The torches in the entrance hall, when the first years climbed the steps, were burning gold. They had been burning their ordinary firelight a moment before. Harry saw the older students notice, saw a passing ghost stop and stare, saw the very flames line fractionally toward him as he passed beneath them, the way the portraits at the manor had inclined their heads. The castle was greeting its landlord, and it did not know how to do it quietly because it had waited 1,000 years to do it at all. Did the candles just, Ron whispered. Yes, Harry said. He kept his face still. But the cupboard boy underneath, the one who had read by the light under a door because no one would give him a lamp, looked up at a castle lighting itself gold for him, and was, very quietly, undone. Professor McGonagall met them in the entrance hall, tall and square and stern in emerald robes, and she ran through the speech she had run through 100 times, the houses, the points, the sorting to come, but her eyes found Harry where he stood among the first years, and stayed on him a moment longer than on the others, and there was something in them he had learned over 3 years to recognize, the look of someone who had known his parents. She caught him as the line formed, a hand light on his shoulder, and said low, for him alone, I taught your mother and father, Mr. Potter, both of them. Your mother sat where you're about to sit, and the hat barely touched her head. Your father took rather longer, he argued with it. A flicker of something warm crossed the stern face. I do not know what you have become these 3 years. The whole of Britain has an opinion, and I have read none of them because I prefer to form my own. But I knew them. And I have wished every day for 10 years that I had argued harder that night about where you were sent. I argued. I want you to know that someone argued. It was not enough, and I am sorry, and I am glad, more glad than I can properly say in a corridor, that you are here, and that you are, whatever else you are, alive and well and standing on your own 2 feet. Her hand tightened once. Welcome to Hogwarts. Try not to own all of it before Christmas. And Harry, who had heard apologies with strings and apologies without them, and had learned to tell the difference in a heartbeat, heard in this one no string at all, only an old regret freely given, and he added Minerva McGonagall to the list beside the deep water where the warm ones went, of whom there were now, he counted, Bill, Ironclaw, Hale, the whole loud tribe of Weasleys, and now this stern woman who had argued for him in the dark 10 years ago and lost. Rather more than he had ever expected to count in a whole life. I'll try, Professor, he said. No promises. The ghost of a smile crossed her face, and she turned and led them in. The great hall was 4 long tables under a ceiling of floating candles and a sky full of stars, and 1,000 faces turned to watch the first years walk the length of it, and on a high stool at the front sat a battered pointed hat, and behind it, at the high table beneath the gold and the stars, sat the staff of Hogwarts, and in the great central chair, the headmaster's chair behind a golden plate and a goblet, sat Albus Dumbledore. Their eyes met across the length of the hall. 3 years had passed since the old man had shaken Harry's hand by the fire at number 12 and gone home without his absolution. They had not been idle years for Dumbledore either. Harry knew, because Harry made it his business to know that the old man had spent them watching and waiting, and that the war he believed in still slept somewhere, and that the chief warlock had not, for one day in 3 years, stopped believing he knew better than the rest of the world what was coming and how to meet it. The certainty was a disease, and it had no cure, and Dumbledore would carry it to his grave. But he had also, in 3 years, never once moved against Harry again. He had freed Sirius Black, a real trial at last that had ended with an innocent man walking out of Azkaban into a freedom he was still learning how to hold, and into a godson who had carefully, over 18 months, begun to build something with him that might, in time, become the family the will had promised. He had kept every true thing and abandoned every move. He had been for 3 years exactly what Harry had told him by the fire he could be. Not a friend, not an enemy, two people who kept accounts, watching each other across a chamber older than both of them. And now the chamber was his castle, and the boy he had hidden and lost and apologized to had come home to it as its landlord, and they looked at each other down the length of the great hall, the most powerful wizard in Britain and the most powerful lord in Britain, the man who built the cupboard and the boy who had built the walls, and Dumbledore inclined his head, not the grand nod of a headmaster to a student. The grave nod of one power to another, the same nod Ragnarok had given Harry across a table 3 years before, sovereign to sovereign. Harry returned it exactly, the same fraction of a degree, the precise courtesy he had given Griffook at the Silver Doors on the first afternoon of the rest of his life, when he had not known what any of it meant and had answered the bow by instinct because it was a transaction and he understood transactions. He understood transactions still. He understood now a great many other things besides. The sorting hat was placed upon his head. McGonagall called Potter Harry, and the hall, which had been murmuring through the whole alphabet, fell into the particular silence of 1,000 people leaning forward at once, and the brim slipped down over his eyes, and a small voice spoke inside his skull. "Well," said the hat. "Well, well, well, it has been a long time since I sat on a head with a founder's blood awake inside it. 1,000 years, give or take. You'll forgive an old hat its excitement. Take your time," Harry thought. "I'm in no hurry. Look at whatever you like. Generous and rare. Most of them are screaming at me to hurry by now." The hat rummaged, and Harry let it, the way he had let Ironclaw read the parchment, with nothing to hide and nothing to fear. "Oh, but you are interesting. Courage, yes, a great deal, though you call it stubbornness, and you'd be half right. Ambition, oceans of it, but pointed only ever at one thing, which is never to be at anyone's mercy again, and that's a Slytherin's drive wearing a Gryffindor's reason, which is a combination I have not seen since the founders themselves, if I'm honest, and I always am. It's the one thing I'm built for." The hat paused. "I could put you in Slytherin. You'd be magnificent there. You'd own it inside a month and run it inside a term." But Harry thought. "But you don't want to own another thing," the hat said more quietly. "You've spent 3 years owning things. You came here for the one thing you can't reclaim with a contract, to be wanted somewhere as yourself by people who like you before they know what you're worth. You found it on the train. You found it on the platform in a woman who wanted you to have a jumper. You want to go where they are." A rustle that might have been a chuckle. "And there is the small matter that you are, by the blood awake in your skull, the heir of Godric Gryffindor himself, and it would be a very strange hat indeed that sorted the heir of Gryffindor anywhere but Gryffindor." The hat cried aloud to the hall, and the castle answered. The Gryffindor table erupted, Ron pounding the table, the Weasley twins on their feet, the whole house roaring a welcome, but underneath the noise in the stones, Harry felt the other thing. The castle's deep glad shudder, the wards turning once more toward him, the gold flames along the walls flaring bright and high all at once, every torch in the great hall blazing gold for the length of a heartbeat, so that 1,000 faces were lit suddenly as if by sunrise, and at the high table the staff looked up and around in alarm, and only one man, the old man in the great central chair, understood what the castle was doing, and why, and bowed his white head over his golden plate just slightly. In something that was either acknowledgement or grief or both, the heir of Gryffindor had come home to the house his ancestor built, and the house, which had been run by tenants for 1,000 years, lit every lamp it had to say so. Harry took off the hat. He walked to the Gryffindor table through the gold light and the roaring, and he sat down among the Weasleys, among the people who had wanted him before they knew, and he let the cupboard boy underneath look up, one more time, at a ceiling full of stars in a hall that was partly his, lit gold in welcome, full to the rafters with the sound of his own name being cheered by people who were glad, actually glad, that he had come. He did not cry. He had decided about that a long time ago in a cupboard, and the decision still held mostly. But it was, as it had been once before in the great hall of his fathers, a very near thing, and he respected the nearness, and he let it be near. The feast was the feast, and it was wonderful, and Harry ate too much and laughed at the twins and learned the names of the boys in his dormitory, and was, for an evening, simply a first year in Gryffindor, which was, he thought, possibly the most expensive thing he had ever purchased, and the only thing he had ever bought that was worth what it cost. But at the end of it, when the plates had cleared and the hall had begun to empty and the prefects were gathering the first years to lead them up to the towers, a fourth-year girl with a head boy's badge, no, Percy Weasley, pompous and proud, was halfway through his speech about staircases when Professor McGonagall appeared at Harry's shoulder and said quietly, "The headmaster would like a word, Mr. Potter, in his office, if you're willing." She added the last part deliberately, and Harry understood it was a message, and that the message was he is asking, not summoning, and someone made sure you'd know the difference. "I'm willing," Harry said. The office at the top of the spiral stair was exactly as he had imagined it from Ironclaw's descriptions 3 years before: the spindle-legged tables, the whirring silver instruments, and he found with grim amusement the one key to Privet Drive, still on its stand, long since stopped, the sleeping portraits of old headmasters, the great red gold bird on its perch that opened one eye as Harry entered and regarded him with ancient interest. Fawkes the Phoenix, Harry knew. The bird whose seal had been pressed into red wax in the margin of his father's sealed will. Dumbledore stood at the window, looking out at the dark grounds, and he did not turn at once, and when he did he was just an old man in a quiet office, and the office, Harry noticed, had its torches burning gold, the way the hall had, the way they had burned since he crossed the lake, because the castle could not stop greeting its landlord, and the headmaster had given up trying to make it. "They won't go back to ordinary while you're in the castle," Dumbledore said, gesturing at the gold flames. "I've asked. The castle is, I'm afraid, beside itself. It has waited rather a long time for one of its own to come home, and it is not subtle about its joy. You'll forgive it. It's older than all of us, and it has never learned tact." He gestured Harry to a chair and took his own behind the great desk and folded his hands. "I asked you here for 2 reasons, and I'll give you both plainly, because I learned 3 years ago that you count what I leave out, and I've grown tired of being counted. Plain is easier. Plain is a relief, actually, at my age." "Then be plain," Harry said, and sat. First, the old man's blue eyes were grave. "You are a student here now, and I am your headmaster, and I want you to understand what that means and what it does not. It does not mean I have any authority over your estate, your seats, your fortune, or your person beyond the bounds of this school and the ordinary rules of it. You are an emancipated lord. I am a schoolmaster. Within these walls you will attend your classes and keep the rules like any child, and outside them you will remain what you have made yourself, and I will not ever again attempt to cross that line. I crossed it once 10 years ago with an emergency seal and a child on a doorstep, and I have spent every day since learning what it cost. I will not cross it twice." He paused. "But it also means something I think you have not let yourself consider, because you have spent 3 years building walls and have not had cause to. It means that for 7 years in this one place you get to simply be a student, to be taught. To be 11 and then 12 and so on in a castle that wants you here among friends who like you. You purchased that tonight by choosing to come here from the bottom rather than buying the top. I watched you choose it. It was the wisest thing I have ever seen a powerful person do, and I have known a great many powerful people and watched nearly all of them forget how to be anything else." Harry was quiet. It was true, all of it, and there was no string, and he had learned to sit with the true things the old man gave him without either taking them or throwing them back. "And the second reason?" he asked. Dumbledore was silent for a moment. Then he rose and crossed to a cabinet, and drew from it something wrapped in dark cloth, and brought it back and laid it on the desk between them and unwrapped it. It was a cloak. Old fluid, the color of running water, and as it caught the gold torchlight it seemed to pour rather than fold, and Harry's eyes wanted to slide off it the way they wanted to slide off the mark on his ring, the triangle and the circle and the line. "This belonged to your father," Dumbledore said. "He lent it to me the week before he died for a purpose I will explain another day, when you are older and the war I keep mentioning has stopped sleeping. I have kept it for you. I had meant to give it to you at Christmas, anonymously, as I once thought a great many anonymous gentle manipulations were wisdom. A flicker of the old self-mockery. But I have given up doing things anonymously to you. They don't work and they're beneath us both. So I am giving it to you plainly across a desk and telling you what it is, which is the one thing I have never told anyone, and which you have, I suspect, already half-guessed because you wear its brother on your hand." Harry looked at the cloak, he looked at the Deepwater ring. He looked at the mark on the ring, triangle, circle, line, and at the cloak that his eyes could not quite hold, and the cold, clear, patient place which had spent 3 years learning the oldest law in Britain assembled the last piece with a click he felt in his teeth. "The Peverell brothers," Harry said slowly. 3 of them, Antioch, Cadmus, Ignatus, the story everyone tells as a children's tale. 3 brothers, 3 gifts." He looked up. "It's not a tale, it's an inventory. The signet is one of them, Cadmus's stone, the resurrection stone set into the ring of the house. And this," he reached out and did not quite touch the cloak, "this is Ignatus's, the cloak that hides its wearer from death itself, my ancestor's cloak, the third Hallow." His voice was very quiet. "I'm not just the heir of Peverell, I'm the heir of the brothers in the story. The Hallows are a Peverell inheritance, and 2 of the 3 have come home to me, and the third—" He stopped, because the third was a wand, and he had read enough by now to know exactly whose hand a certain wand was said to rest in, and he looked very carefully at the old man across the desk, who looked back and did not deny it, and that was, as ever, the most honest thing he could have done. "Another day," Dumbledore said softly, "when the war wakes." "There is a reason the parchment said your inheritance changed the shape of the world, Harry, and it is not the gold, and it is not the seats, and it is not even the castle. It is this. It is what you are the heir to underneath all the rest. But you are 11, and it is the 1st of September, and your friends are waiting for you in a tower, and the rest can keep." He wrapped the cloak again and pushed it across the desk into Harry's hands. "Take your father's cloak. Go and be a child for as long as the world will let you. It will not be very long, it never is for boys like you, but it will be longer than you had, and I find to my own surprise that giving you a little more of it back is the only thing left in my long life that feels entirely, uncomplicatedly good." Harry took the cloak. It was lighter than air and heavier than anything he owned, and he held it, his father's cloak, the inheritance underneath the inheritance, and he looked at the old man who had built him a cupboard and was now at the last handing him back pieces of the family that had been stolen with the rest. The cloak, the godfather, the truth, freely, with no string, because he had finally, after 90 years, learned that the things that mattered could not be given any other way. "Thank you," Harry said. And it was the real thing, given once to a man who had not earned it and was receiving it anyway, because Harry had discovered, somewhere in 3 years between a cupboard and a castle, that you did not give the warm things only to the ones who deserved them. You gave them because you had them to give, and giving them was the one kind of power that grew rather than shrank in the spending. He walked back to the Gryffindor Tower through corridors that lit themselves gold ahead of him and dimmed gently behind, the castle escorting its landlord home like a great glad dog that did not know its own strength, and he carried his father's cloak under his arm, and the deep-water ring sat warm on his hand, and far below him in the deep foundations, the oldest magic in Britain turned toward him in its sleep and was content. The fat lady's portrait swung open on the common room, and it was full, the whole of Gryffindor crammed in by the fire, waiting up past hours because the prefects had not had the heart to send them to bed, all of them turning as he came through the hole in the wall, and Ron leaping up, and the twins starting a chant of his name that was somehow already a joke and already affectionate. And a girl with wild hair and an armful of books informing him severely that he'd missed the prefect's talk about the staircases, and she'd taken notes if he wanted them. And a round-faced boy clutching a toad asking shyly if it was true the candles had gone gold for him, and the whole warm, loud, ordinary crush of it closing around the boy from the cupboard like water closing over a stone. Harry stood in the doorway for a moment, just inside it, and looked at them, the friends who had liked him before they knew, the house that was his by blood and his now, too, by something better than blood, and he thought, the way he had thought it in the bank and in the breakfast room and in the great hall of his father's with the grey sea beyond the glass, mine. But it meant something different now than it had meant on the first afternoon, when it had been a wall going up around a horde. It did not mean taken back, it did not mean held against them. It meant only this, the simplest thing, the thing the cupboard had tried hardest to teach him was impossible and had been in the end the one thing it was wrong about. I belong here. They are glad I came. This is home. He had been told once by everyone who had charge of him that he owned nothing, was owed nothing, was worth nothing, and would amount to nothing, and there had never been a plan for him at all. And he had gone to a bank to find out the truth, and the truth had been larger than the lie by an amount no parchment could hold, half of magical Britain and a castle, and a name 1,000 years deep, and an inheritance underneath the inheritance that would, one day, when the war woke, change the shape of the world. But standing in the doorway of the Gryffindor common room, lit gold by a castle that could not stop greeting him, with his father's cloak under his arm and his friends shouting his name, Harry Potter understood at last that the largest thing he had reclaimed was not in any vault, and not on any ledger, and not written on the golden river of names that hung in the long gallery of the manor by the grey northern sea. It was this, the being wanted, the coming home. The establishment had spent a season trying to keep it from him, and had thrown its custody and its patriotism and its laws and its oldest, filthiest magic, and had lost all of it, every piece, to a boy who simply read more carefully and counted more honestly and refused, every single time, to be moved out of the rooms where he was strong. And now the boy was home in the strongest room of all, the one no law could reach and no contract could buy, and the most powerful lord in Britain crossed the threshold into the warm gold noise of it, and let the door swing shut behind him, and was, for the first time in his life, exactly where he belonged. Let them try to teach him. He had a great deal still to learn. But he had already learned the thing that mattered most, the thing the cupboard had been wrong about, the thing half of magical Britain and a goblin bank and a castle full of gold light had spent a season proving true. He had been worth something all along. He had only been waiting, like the house, like the line, like the stone turning in the deep water of his ring, waiting all his life for the proof. And the proof had come, and it had his name on it, and it filled half a kingdom. Chapter 7 end.